utter devastation and destruction of all worldly possessions by the strongest storm ever to descend upon the Bahamas, Hurricane Dorian. I have also met with many misplaced Abaconians and Grand Bahamians who are now residing in Freetown, living with loved ones, or in our evacuation center, warmly and graciously offered by the parishioners of Pilgrim Baptist Temple on St. James Road. There's been an outpouring of love and support in Freetown for our brothers and sisters from the north, who have, in some cases, lost everything, and who have, in all cases, come to Nassau in search of food and shelter, but most importantly, that family support system that helps us through tragedies such as this. Even the Freetown constituency office has risen to the occasion, Mr. Speaker, opening its doors to the people of Abaco. And now the Freetown constituency office serves also as the temporary constituency office for the displaced residents of South and Central Abaco in Nassau, a place for them to meet and fellowship, follow up on loved ones, and plan for their eventual return to the place which for them will always be their home. Mr. Speaker, I say to the people of Abaco, mi casa es su casa. My home is your home. Stay as long as you need, take as long as you want. The good people of Freetown will always be here for you. Mr. Speaker, up until the arrival of Hurricane Dorian, the Bahamas was on track once again to have the best year ever for tourism arrivals. As you remember, Mr. Speaker, 2018, last year, was a record year. 6.6 million tourists, the most we had ever welcomed to our shores. And up to the end of August 2019, foreign visitor arrivals had increased every single month for 2019. And we were ahead of the record-breaking 2018 by 12.5%. Mr. Speaker, for the first 8 months of 2019, 565,000 more tourists had come to the Bahamas than in 2018. Mr. Speaker, if you add that additional 565,000 tourists to the 6.6 million tourists that we had last year, you quickly ascertained that we had blown through the 7 million tourist barrier for the first time in the history of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, we were firing on all cylinders. Record after record was being broken. Hotels were full, employment in the tourism sector was up, and the economy was on track to beat GDP growth projections. Alas, Mr. Speaker, on the 1st of September 2019, interestingly enough, my 29th wedding anniversary, Hurricane Dorian blew into the Bahamas, causing untold damage to our people, ripping them from their homes, destroying entire communities, destroying livelihoods, and in some instances taking lives, all of which had the devastating effect of bringing our economic arrival screeching to a halt. Mr. Speaker, we had to switch almost overnight from nation building to restoration and recovery. Mr. Speaker, the first thing that the Ministry of Tourism and Aviation must do at times like this is to manage our crisis communications to get the right messages across. Since, as we have learned from the Caribbean experience, even those islands that are not impacted by the storm may still lose much needed revenue as visitors stay away, not only trying to avoid unwittingly running into a disaster zone and having their vacations ruined, but also out of a feeling of helplessness and not wanting to be seen to enjoy themselves while the locals are suffering. Therefore, as soon as Dorian passed, the global communications and executive team of the ministry went to work to clarify for travelers exactly what it meant for them and for the Bahamas. In order to address the issue, we had to learn to manage crisis communications to get the right messages across at times like these. We also contacted news editors and producers to ensure that they understood the geography of the country, calling the two impacted islands by name, Abaco and Grand Bahama, and that it was not the entire Bahamas that was destroyed. We also made sure that we corrected errors in their reporting, especially anything that suggested that the entire Bahamas was destroyed. Further, we had to inform that tourism is what we do, and visiting the Bahamas helps the Bahamas to earn what it needs to recover better from this disaster. In fact, since the passage of Hurricane Dorian, between the Director General of Tourism, the Deputy Director General, and myself, we have conducted over 50 international media interviews, including with CNN, CBS, MSNBC, Fox, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Bloomberg, Associated Press, to name but a few. Had 165 placements pitched and secured, featuring our 14 islands open for business messaging, and had more than 860 million positive media impressions generated. Mr. Speaker, despite all this work with the media, we realize that there are still many potential travelers who think that the entire Bahamas was wiped out by Dorian. Everywhere we travel, people are asking us, are you all right? Were you impacted by the storm? And then the geography lesson starts, stating that the Bahamas is a group of islands stretching 550 miles or 1,000 kilometers from Grand Bahama in the north to Anagua in the south, and Hurricane Dorian was only 40 miles in diameter, therefore leaving much of the many islands of the Bahamas untouched by the storm. Mr. Speaker, immediately following the storm, the Ministry of Tourism's digital channels focused narrowly on relief efforts. Meanwhile, our public relations outreach to news outlets, meteorologists, and travel editors provided updates on the status of airports, cruise ports, open hotels, and storm impacts. Right now, we are addressing all of our channels to repeatedly show potential visitors that the Bahamas is unique in the breadth of its geography, and that we still have 14 islands that are open and in business and welcoming visitors. Moreover, visiting the Bahamas helps the Bahamas to recover, because tourism is what we do. We are using the content marketing assets that we launched earlier this year, following our very successful rebranding effort, to drive the narrative that the Bahamas is ready to welcome visitors, and also to influence the discussions in the marketplace and to showcase the beauty that the Bahamas still offers. Additional content is tailored to address the questions that potential travelers are investigating. We're making it easy for consumers to find content that tells them what to know about Bahamas travel right now. On a daily basis, we are updating the media and keeping the Bahamas visible, and inspirational to consumers, so that we could remain front of mind as a travel consideration. Later on, as Abaco and Grand Bahama come back, we will also share their updates and messages. That said, Mr. Speaker, our public relation efforts are just part of what the Ministry of Tourism does to help to get the industry back on track after a storm. Our involvement starts from when we know a storm is coming, and our crisis management provisions kick in as we set up, coordinate communication with, and provide assistance to affected hoteliers and travelers. Immediately after a storm, the ministry pitches in to support the on-the-ground recovery efforts, collaborating with NEMA and facilitating disaster relief deliveries and donations. After the passage of Hurricane Dorian, the broader tourism industry contributed heavily to the relief efforts, as it usually does, providing planes and boats to bring supplies to the affected areas and to airlift survivors to Nassau, donating food, supplies, and funding to the relief effort, and offering jobs and housing to displaced tourism workers. Many local hotels, large and small, on islands that were not affected by Dorian, are reaching out in this way. Further, the Bahamas and Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Associations have spearheaded a Tourism Jobs for Bahamas initiative to help to connect job seekers with open positions and to expand the pool of available opportunities. Estimates are that there are some 2,500 tourism workers on Abaco and Grand Bahama Island that have been displaced. These associations are utilizing the Caribbean Tourism Job Bank to help connect job seekers with those open opportunities. I wish to take this opportunity to publicly say a heartfelt thank you to all of our industry partners, both in the Bahamas and abroad, who sought to help us in our time of need. These expressions and outpouring of support will never be forgotten. Undoubtedly, Mr. Speaker, the rebuilding of the ruined infrastructure and communities on Abaco and Grand Bahama will take a while. However, the swift recovery of the national tourism product will position the country to do better, to be better able to shoulder the costs associated with building back better and all that it requires. We know that we have much work to do to maintain the momentum that we had worked so hard to achieve. To this end, the ministry invested in a satellite media tour, and for 2 days last week, we had an international media crew on island to A, take footage of Nassau and New Providence to show in real time that this island was totally unimpacted by Hurricane Dorian, and B, to conduct interviews with myself and my senior team. This satellite media tour afforded us the opportunity to be placed in front of key audiences on top networks and outlets throughout the United States. It targeted specific geographic regions and allowed us to reach millions of viewers in hundreds of markets in just a short amount of time. Mr. Speaker, myself and my team, over 5 non-stop hours, it's the hardest I've ever worked, conducted 25 live interviews, ranging from the Weather Channel to local stations in key markets, including Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Orlando. As I indicated, this is not the time to rest. We are being proactive and reaching the audience that need to hear the message that we remain open for business, but also to combat some of the misconceptions and fake stories that have been circulating. Mr. Speaker, I am encouraged that we will rebound, but here are our projections moving forward. Following a 13.1% increase in international air arrivals to the Bahamas for the first 8 months of 2019, air arrivals decreased by 19% in the first 2 weeks of September as cancellations spiked, and we expect that air arrivals will be down for the first time this year by 8% for the entire month of September. Leading markets in the United States and Canada are expected in September to be down by 12.5% and 15.3% respectively. According to Forward Keys, our forward booking situation for the last quarter of 2019 is somewhat challenging, with bookings projected to be down by 8.9% for the 3-month period to the end of the year. Specifically, forward bookings for arrivals in October is expected to be down 10.6%. November is expected to be down 10.9%, and December is expected to be down 4.4%. I guess, Mr. Speaker, this is to be expected, given that Abaco and Grand Bahama generated approximately 11% of our air arrivals for the first 8 months of 2019. And with their reduction in available hotel room inventory, decreases in air arrivals are inevitable. Mr. Speaker, this is the first time as Minister of Tourism that I have had to project a decrease in tourism arrivals. So this is something new to me. But I am encouraged that once we turn the corner into 2020, we are projecting that the decreases will stop and single-digit arrival increases will again materialize. Mr. Speaker, airlift capacity to the Bahamas increased by 17.2% in August and was expected to continue to increase, especially from the US and Canada, to the end of this year. On the whole, airlines have indicated to us that they see anticipated growth in bookings for the end of this year and through to the first quarter of next year to the Bahamas, which is encouraging for us all. Mr. Speaker, as you know, Bahamas Air proved instrumental in airlifting thousands of Bahamians out of Abaco and Grand Bahama. Once the flood waters had receded from the airports on these 2 islands, Bahamas Air and a host of other local airlines, such as Delta, Western, and Trans-Island Airways, undertook rescue missions to remove Bahamians and non-Bahamians from the devastating after effects of Hurricane Dorian. Specifically, as it relates to Bahamas Air, 13 flights were operated from Treasure Cay, evacuating 765 passengers to Nassau. 13 flights were operated from Marsh Harbor, evacuating 1,065 passengers to Nassau. 12 flights were operated from Freeport, evacuating 1,250 passengers to Nassau. In total, Mr. Speaker, 38 evacuation flights were flown by Bahamas Air from Abaco and Grand Bahama, transporting a total of 3,080 passengers to Nassau. Bahamas Air pegs the total direct cost of this evacuation, along with three additional flights chartered by NEMA, at $348,000, or approximately $113 per passenger. However, when one factors in the lost revenue from canceled flights, especially over the Labor Day holiday, which we all know to be a heavy travel period, I'm advised that the losses sustained by Bahamas Air because of the passing of Hurricane Dorian quickly spiral above the $2 million mark. Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend, however, all of the pilots and cabin staff and ground personnel of Bahamas Air who took part in these evacuation exercises for a job well done. Mr. Speaker, I don't know where we would have been without Bahamas Air. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend all of the hundreds of volunteers who gave willingly of their time and resources to operate a very special, a very warm, a very caring, welcoming operation which greeted passengers as they disembarked from the Bahamas Air evacuation flights over the Odyssey hangar. To see the outpouring of compassion towards evacuees who had clearly just gone through an incredibly traumatic series of events reinforced my faith in God and in mankind too. Mr. Speaker, the state of airports in Treasure Key, Marsh Harbor, and Freeport is varied, but mostly not good. Freeport was completely flooded once again, and every single building at that airport was significantly impacted by a storm surge in excess of 20 feet. Once again, Mr. Speaker, many of the buildings will have to be condemned and rebuilt, and the operator of that airport, Hutchison Ports, is contemplating the way forward. Right now, Mr. Speaker, that airport is only open for scheduled domestic flights, Bahamas Air and Western Air, but has not yet been cleared to receive scheduled flights from overseas. Hutchison Ports has assured the government and the residents of Grand Bahama that they will operationalize that airport for international flights by the middle of next month, hopefully by the 15th of November. But reports are sketchy on when the pre-clearance facility will reopen. For the time being, residents of Grand Bahama, therefore, traveling to the United States will now need a U.S. visa if they depart for the U.S. from Freeport. Or they can travel to Nassau and enter the United States without a U.S. visa by using the pre-clearance facility at LPIA. All of the buildings at the Treasure Key Airport were completely destroyed. Roof gone, window and doors blown out, and will, as a result, have to be completely rebuilt. The airport authority has remit for this airport, and when it has completed its assessment and costing of the repairs, a restoration plan will be executed. Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive study of all the airports, known as the Stantec report, was completed by my predecessor in 2014, and it was recommended that the operation of this airport, the Treasure Key Airport, would best be served by a private operator, i.e. it should really be operated as an FBO. We will use this opportunity, therefore, to seriously consider the implementation of this recommendation. Mr. Speaker, the Marsh Harbor Airport, too, sustained substantial damage. While from the outside it seems to have emerged from this storm relatively unscathed, water did penetrate the building, and as a result, there are issues that relate to that. Further, this building, after the storm had passed, became a place of refuge to many, and that too led to further damage. Mr. Speaker, the airport authority is working diligently to get this airport to the point where it can once again receive international scheduled flights. It is critical that this take place as soon as possible, since the economy, especially that portion related to the restoration of tourism, demands that it happens as soon as possible. We have a lot to do. Power and internet are being provided using backup systems, and they are not ideal. Almost all of the fencing enclosing the airport was destroyed in the storm, and that needs to be repaired before the airport can get clearance from the Americans through the TSA. The tower and the firehouse sustained substantial damage, although the airport does have sufficient firefighting capability to handle flights up to a level 5. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the hard-working employees of the Airport Authority who did an incredible job during the storm, and since the storm have been working in less than ideal conditions to get this airport back up and running. They are basically camping in the terminal, which only just got water. So, Mr. Speaker, we owe these employees an enormous debt of gratitude for all that they have done and continue to do. Mr. Speaker, that wraps up my report from the Ministry of Tourism and Aviation. As you can see, we have a very challenging period ahead of us, but I do remain extremely optimistic about the future. The Bahamas is a wonderful brand, and our foreign visitors are remaining loyal to us. What we found in tourism is that it's extremely resilient. It's subject to many shocks. We have travel advisories, we have storms, but it bounces back very quickly. We had a hurricane in 2015, we had a hurricane in 2016, we had a hurricane in 2017, we caught a break in 18, and now we have one in 2019. And as you can see, tourism in all instances have bounced back and continued to grow. So I remain very optimistic about the future of tourism, Mr. Speaker, and I hopefully in the first quarter of next year, I'll report back to the House, as I have done in every instance before that we're back on an upward trajectory and that tourism is expected to drive the economy forward and help us rebuild Abaco and Grand Bahama. With that, Mr. Speaker, Freetown supports the bill, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, an instructive quote says, "Helping one person might not change the world, but it could change the world for one person." In the wake of the passage of Dorian, the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, I submit, needs the world of help, and the world of help will make a world of difference. Mr. Speaker, I, along with my parliamentary colleagues, during the lunch break, witnessed the signing of the Bahama expansion, a project that will bring reportedly 500 permanent jobs. The Speaker, another person says, "We don't want to know how much you know. We want to know how much you care." That is showing support, that is showing the help, and that is the work we need. Mr. Speaker, I stand on behalf of the good people of Seabreeze to lend my contribution to the debate on these significant amendments reflected in the Disaster Preparedness and Response Amendment Bill 2019. On behalf of my family, Mr. Speaker, and the constituents of Seabreeze, I wish to extend my condolences to my brothers and sisters throughout the length and breadth of the Family Islands, in particular, those residents in the islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama, and to my parliamentary colleagues who live, represent constituents and constituencies, or have close families in the affected islands, who have all suffered the devastating blow at the hands of devastating Dorian. We pray your healing, your recovery, and full restoration, and commit to doing all we can to offer the support and the help necessary to aid the recovery process. Mr. Speaker, just Saturday past, the Women of Parliament came together to pay a visit to the residents of the island of Grand Bahama, our second city, which we know received a severe blow to its economy, its cultural landscape, and multiple communities. Thanks to the generosity and teamwork of the female parliamentarians of the upper and lower houses, we were able to provide support, encouragement, and the motivation to strengthen their collective spirit and resolve to rebuild not only their homes, but their hearts, their minds, and the lives of our brothers and sisters severely affected by the ravages of devastating Dorian. So, Speaker, coming from that eyewitnessing experience in Grand Bahama, today I submit that our affected islands need the world of help, and the world of help will make the world of difference. This amendment to the bill is small yet significant, reflecting the preparedness and responsive elements of disaster management. The amendment introduces provisions that have the impact of saving lives and provisions to prevent and respond more effectively and more rapidly in the likely event of future hurricanes and incidences of great flooding. Pertinent clauses of this bill include Section 27A, Mr. Speaker, evacuation orders, Section 27B, declaration of relief by the Prime Minister, and Section 27C, publishing order. It is to be noted that the substantive bill was passed in 2008. This bill is progressive, Mr. Speaker, that is before us. And progressive people, I didn't say the Progressive Liberal Party, but progressive people, Mr. Speaker, will no doubt support this bill. Mr. Speaker, it demonstrates that this government has in its contemplation the needs for laws and amendments to laws that will improve the lives of our people and strengthen the work of the government, especially as it relates to natural disasters such as hurricanes. Mr. Speaker, devastating Dorian or Dee damaged our homes, demolished our schools, to a significant extent diminished the quality of life in the affected portions of 2 of our 16 functional islands. Mr. Speaker, while we recognize that our 14 major islands remain 100% open for business and functional, there is no doubt about it, to achieve our reconstruction and recovery targets, we need the world of help, and the world of help will make the world of difference. Specifically, direct help with building supplies, voluntary skilled domestic construction workers, trained counseling for groups and individuals are key contributions needed to aid this stage of our recovery efforts. Mr. Speaker, we are all hurting, yet it is more blessed to give than to receive. There is an account of a biblical story where in the midst of a drought, a widow only had a handful of meal in a barrel and a little oil in a cruse. Her plan was to eat that bread or to eat that meal and to die. As a result of the drought, she was devastated. She was destitute, Mr. Speaker. But she encountered a prophet, and he appealed to her to be obedient, to give the little that she had. Mr. Speaker, the long and short of the story is that she did. And as a result, she and her house, they ate many days in the midst of the drought. What am I saying, Mr. Speaker? Bahamians, many times you don't understand what your leader is saying or doing, but be obedient. The story also reveals the importance of walking in faith. The final lesson from this story may be interpreted in the words of the late John F. Kennedy, who said during his 1961 inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you. It may seem hard in this hour, but ask or say what you can do for your country." Mr. Speaker, recovery and healing, it is a process. A process means there are steps, there are procedures, and there is a need for prioritizing. The first thing is to have the right frame of mind, I submit, Mr. Speaker. And I submit that the right frame of mind in this hour, in this time, and in this day is simply to help. Consider where you are and whether it's helping. Consider what you've done, whether it is helpful. Mr. Speaker, relief, recovery, and restoration just simply requires a mindset of help. The great Mahalia Jackson sang, "If I can help somebody as I travel along, then my living shall not be in vain." Mr. Speaker, we will need the patience of Job. We will need the resolve of Esther, the determination of Deborah, and the love of Jesus to see this project to its end. It's a mammoth task. We recognize that. Notwithstanding, beginning at a stage while many of us are still in mourning and we're traumatized, have suffered great loss, and have to now labor under the most unfavorable conditions. But one thing we do, Mr. Speaker, we do know is that we must rebuild. For Native Bahamians, resilience is our past, resilience is our present, resiliency is our future. Mr. Speaker, however, we are not alone. The world is familiar with the growing impacts of climate change. Truth be told, one fact that cannot be ignored or disputed is that severe hurricanes are part of the Bahamian culture and the culture of the islands of the Bahamas, and by extension, the islands of the Caribbean. We are part of the Atlantic. We sit in a hurricane belt. Hence, we must do our best to prepare, and having prepared, Mr. Speaker, the only thing we can do after that is just to pray. Mr. Speaker, we are not alone. The world has suffered devastation and even greater tragedy. But as the good Lord would have it, we must all go on. In 1138, the Aleppo earthquake claimed 230,000 lives in Syria. In 1839, the Coringa cyclone hit the port city of Coringa, India, with a recorded 300,000 estimate of lives lost. In 1924, there was the Haiyan earthquake, which hit central China with a record of 273,400 death toll. In 1976, the world witnessed the great Tianjin earthquake, a magnitude 7.8, which rocketed that industrial Chinese city and claimed 255,000 lives. 2004, India suffered a massive tsunami, which was compact with a magnitude of 9.3 Tembla that struck undersea off the west coast of Sumatra. The death toll is recorded, Mr. Speaker, 230,000 and 280,000, with Indonesia being the hardest hit, in addition to Sri Lanka. On January 12, 2010, Haiti suffered a massive 7.0 earthquake, which likewise claimed between 230,000 to 316,000 lives, confirming 160,000 deaths. Hundreds of thousands, Mr. Speaker, still missing. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, this is the unfortunate consequence of natural disasters, with lives lost as leaders in the government, members, including members of the opposition. I wanted to say this to the member for Exuma and Ragged Islands, but he's not here. We can expect frantic calls, but we know that we must be that beacon of help and that hope. Here in the Bahamas this year, we suffered devastating Dorian, resulting in many lives missing. And we do not trivialize our loss, but government can only responsibly account for the bodies recovered. The Speaker, in 2017, the southern parts of the Bahamas, before Irma, we suffered Irma. In 2016, here in New Providence and other islands, we lost roofs, suffered great flooding through rising tide due to Hurricane Matthew. We remember Floyd, Wilma, Jane, Francis, and the unforgettable, but I can't forget from a child, Hurricane Andrew. In the hurricane belt, we are susceptible to severe thunderstorms, flooding, rising tide. This means that we are vulnerable and we are on the global margin for natural disasters. And perhaps for this cause and none other, we must come together to work together to help one another. Truth be told, Mama said, South and Central, there'd be days like this. There would be days like this, Mama said. Disaster preparedness is a continuous and integrated process, resulting from a wide range of risk reduction activities and resources. It requires and encompasses the contributions of many different areas, ranging from first responders, training, provision of social service assistance and services, food security, mental health, housing and accommodations, infrastructural assessments, environmental impact, healthcare, mental health, security, human well-being, and administrative and emergency provisions. The purpose of disaster preparedness is to predict where possible, prevent disasters, mitigate their impact on vulnerable populations, and to respond to and effectively cope with their consequences at local, national, and international levels. Natural disasters are major events, Mr. Speaker, resulting from natural processes of the earth: floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanoes, eruptions, earthquakes, etc. And this increasing phenomenon is not unique to any particular country or part of the continent. Mr. Speaker, fact is, it is nearly impossible to predict or to adequately prepare for a natural disaster. We can only do our very best. Mr. Speaker, I submit that the government of the Bahamas is working. The government of the Bahamas is helping. The government, this leader, the members of cabinet, the entire parliament as a whole have been appointed, I believe, for a time such as this, agreeing with Marco City. We have every confidence that we are up to the task with all our strengths, and yes, Mr. Speaker, with all our weaknesses. A songwriter says, Mr. Speaker, Lord, I am not what I ought to be, but Lord, I'm trying. One thing we cannot dispute is that the government is trying. We cannot dispute that the government is working. Mr. Speaker, in the midst of the storm, after the storm, Mr. Speaker, and we are keeping the country afloat. Mr. Speaker, that's leadership. Mr. Speaker, our doors are not closed. They are yet open. In the wake of the devastating storm listed here, in no particular order, Mr. Speaker, the government of the Bahamas, Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture continues to provide help and hope as we go about the work of recovery and restoration in the aftermath of devastating Dorian. Mr. Speaker, immediately we tabled the exigency order. Immediately, Mr. Speaker, the Hurricane Dorian replacement of government-issued documents, exemption from fees bill 2019, and here today we debate the disaster preparedness bill, amendment bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, this government appreciates the urgency of the matter, and we are here today because we are working. We coordinated massive rescue and recovery efforts. Mr. Speaker, at times I was asking the Minister of Health whether he was sleeping. Mr. Speaker, we are working, and we cannot deny that. Mr. Speaker, we want to be able to say thank you. We executed daily public briefings, daily, every other day. Mr. Speaker, the country knows and heard before the storm, almost during the storm, after the storm, the Prime Minister came with the entire cabinet, Mr. Speaker, and we alerted the people, and we indicated that we are here for the people. Mr. Speaker, the people saw us. We're not hiding anywhere. Mr. Speaker, we have reported for duty. The government is working. Secured individuals and families, emergency medical service. We have to be thankful, Mr. Speaker. Coordinated high-level safety protocols, led a national prayer is important, Mr. Speaker. Immediately after the hurricane, led a national prayer service, restored the power to the islands affected, restoration of fresh water supply. Mr. Speaker, these things don't drop out the sky. Somebody is working and somebody is leading the charge, Mr. Speaker. Situational response, oil spills, home invasion, looting, these things are expected, Mr. Speaker, but the fact is this government is working and we are doing our very best for and on behalf of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture is working and we are helping. I met, Mr. Speaker, over the weekend with many of the youth affected in Grand Bahama and perhaps some relocated from Abaco. I said this to those young people and I'll say it here. For those of us that remain, we remain to serve a purpose. Let us be focused because that purpose we must serve. Our ministry conducted the assessments 2 weeks ago on our offices in both Grand Bahama and Abaco. We have found our office in Grand Bahama has, Mr. Speaker, been totally destroyed, all of the equipment lost, and even for some of the, Mr. Speaker, some of our staff members, they have lost everything as well. In Abaco, Mr. Speaker, our office is there in the government complex and it remains functional. And so we are very grateful for that. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to report our continued relationship with the Ministry of Education. Mr. Speaker, we held at our ministry immediately after, because many families were affected, we held a joint prayer service to encourage the staff members. Mr. Speaker, Minister Jeff Lloyd was there, and in his clerical hat, he brought forward the word. And Mr. Speaker, we were just inspired to go on. The work to register students, our ministry continues to work with education officers to register students, our Department of Sports, for sporting activities for those persons who are displaced. Mr. Speaker, the Division of Youth, in partnership with Jesus in the Park, we launched Youth Month and we held a free concert, and I want to applaud those persons, those artists who came from all over the region. Mr. Speaker, some said they were here for the first time from Jamaica, from Trinidad, and we bused people directly who were at the various shelters. We bused them directly to the concert, Mr. Speaker, to encourage them. And at that event, Mr. Speaker, we directly raised funds, Mr. Speaker, I think it was under 3,000 towards the relief efforts that very, very night. Mr. Speaker, one thing we cannot deny is that the government of the Bahamas is working. And Mr. Speaker, the government of the Bahamas is helping. I commend Mr. DJ Godson and the entire team, the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, in particular the Division of Youth. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Sports We are launching as soon as the South Beach pools are up and running. They're under renovations. They're almost done. It was down, Mr. Speaker, for about 5 years, and it's almost done, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the cooperation of Ministry of Works and Ministry of Education. And Mr. Speaker, we have one more pool to go. And Mr. Speaker, we're going to begin a Let's Swim program, recognizing that a number of our people need to learn how to swim. So, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Sport is leading that charge as well. Mr. Speaker, the Division of Culture. I want to report we have partners in our ministry, and one of those partners is the Junkanoo Corporation of New Providence, certainly our National Junkanoo Committee. They would have pledged to donating during this Christmas season $20,000, and they have indicated that they look to raise $80,000 towards the national relief efforts. And so I do commend the Junkanoo Corporation of New Providence. Mr. Speaker, if I may for a moment highlight the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. Immediately in the aftermath of Dorian, the gallery went about immediately to provide relief and help to the people of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, they started a first responders crisis management sessions for media persons that witnessed Mr. Speaker, the losses in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, for fire services and police officers, Mr. Speaker, and I understand it was well attended. They have art therapy, film series for persons to learn freely about, Mr. Speaker, climate change and the effects of climate change. It's going on at the National Art Gallery, West Hill Street. Mr. Speaker, and I want to commend them for waiving their fees to the art gallery until the end of December. And can you believe, Mr. Speaker, they have also prepared care packages, Mr. Speaker, for persons who may need to use art as a venue for therapy and relief from the stress. And so I do commend them. The Division of Youth on December 7th, in conjunction with IMAX, is hosting a free benefit concert, the proceeds of which will go towards the national relief efforts. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be denied that the government of the Bahamas is working, and the government of the Bahamas is helping the people. Mr. Speaker, Seabreeze suffered loss in the passage of the devastating Dorian. Seabreeze is a low-lying area, and certain parts of Seabreeze suffered significant flooding during the passage of Dorian. During my inspection of damages, I found that southern portions like Lamumba Lane which is yet to fully recover from the devastation of Matthew. They experienced even more flooding as a result of Dorian, and also Sandilands Village Road that sits on the northern border of the constituency. And so, Mr. Speaker, they are in need of drainage systems and assessment to see what can be done, Mr. Speaker, to relieve that level of flooding in the area. But, Mr. Speaker, we have a group of resilient people throughout the community, and we will continue to work with Ministry of Works, who's been very good to Seabreeze, Mr. Speaker, since coming into office. We will continue to build a better Seabreeze. Mr. Speaker, the youth and the community of sports is working. The youth and the community of sports is helping. I am pleased to report on the success of Team Bahamas at the recent IAAF World Championship Games held in Doha, Qatar. Mr. Speaker, these successes help to lift the spirits of all Bahamians in the midst of this challenge. I congratulate the Bahamas Athletic Association of Athletic Associations, team manager, Mr. Fritz Grant, and coaches, and all who comprise Team Bahamas, most of all the 9 athletes for their outstanding performances on the world stage. Mr. Speaker, I want to also commend, before I mention their names, Ms. Pauline Davis Thompson, who was awarded lifetime member of the IAAF. Mr. Speaker, a very unique award and a very high award in the international sporting community, and she is the first in the Caribbean to receive it. So we really want to commend her. And Mr. Cartwright, who was recognized by the IAAF for his services in coaching throughout the years. Mr. Speaker, in the midst of the storm, Bahamas is still doing great things on the world stage. Mr. Speaker, the highlight for us in the Bahamas was Mr. Speaker, the performances of our Stephen Gardner, who brought home the gold. Mr. Speaker, as he gapped his competitors, all the entire Ministry of Youth did was watch in awe, and youth, sports, and culture. And then we want to commend our golden girl as well, or our Diamond League girl, Shawnee, Mr. Speaker, for securing the silver in the women's 400 meters race. Mr. Speaker, they've done our hearts well. I heard the member for Exuma and Ragged Island speak about, Mr. Speaker, whether or not we'll celebrate them. The Ministry of Sports knows its role. Mr. Speaker, I understand they are coordinating with all members of the team, not just 2 or 3, but all members of the team who qualified and put their best foot forward. We want to celebrate all of them. As for the event just passed, Mr. Speaker, I had no knowledge of it, and if I don't have knowledge, I'm not able to attend. I'll be very clear on that, Mr. Speaker, but we wish our athletes all the best, and the sooner we can stop playing politics with these matters is the better we'll be for it. Mr. Speaker, and so in conclusion, devastating Dorian has given us a hard hit as a people, as a government, our communities, our systems, our way of life. This is not the time, Mr. Speaker, to blame, but this is the time to help. Not the time to point fingers, but the time for each of us to do our part. And if you did something last week, then you need to do something more. We thank you, but I ask that you do more. The Speaker, I don't know about persons, everybody want to go to Baptist church, but in the Baptist church, we give one offering. I don't know, a lot of Anglicans in here, they ain't saying amen. But we gave one offering. I think member for Pinewood knows about this. We give one offering, and then we have to come back, and, sometimes we need a little more, to help with the work. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say that to say, Mr. Speaker, if you are saying that you gave towards relief efforts last week, that is good, and we thank you. But may I say that we need your continued help, and last week is gone, and we need you to see what you can do this week. We need all the help. Listen, the Bahamas needs the world of help, and we have no pride right now, and the world of help will make the world of difference. So if you gave last week, we need you to give this week. Let's focus on helping. Let's focus on giving. Mr. Speaker, high IQ is excellent, but EQ is equally as important. We must have a degree of emotional intelligence, understanding, Mr. Speaker, that many are going through. You don't know what someone else is going through, and so we want to be thankful for every help that we have received. The Prime Minister for his help, the Deputy Prime Minister, members of the Cabinet for the work they have done and continue to do, members of the public, Mr. Speaker, the opposition, keeping us alert, keeping our feet to the fire. Mr. Speaker, our investors, the residents of the affected islands, our international and regional security partners, Mr. Speaker, and just volunteer non-profit organizations that are here. I saw them in Grand Bahama, just working and doing their part every day, Mr. Speaker, and those Bahamians and persons who have taken in refugees at this time, to help them get back on their feet. Mr. Speaker, we know the load is not easy, but if they've taken a load off of us, that's the only way it's going to be done, Mr. Speaker, if we all work hand in hand. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Almighty God for his grace and his mercy, because but for the grace of God, someone say, there go I. It could have been worse, but thank God we are here today. Mr. Speaker, songwriter said, your grace and your mercy brought me through. I'm living this moment because of you. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas has suffered a death blow by devastating Dorian. And while we may be down, the fact is, Mr. Speaker, and to the Bahamas, through you, we are not out. Together we can rebuild our Bahama land, but we each have to focus on helping with reconstruction, helping with recovery, helping with restoration. We have to first renew our minds and understand where we are in the process of restoration. We are at the point of helping. The Bahamas needs the world of help, Mr. Speaker, and the world of help will make the world of difference. The Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, our affiliates, will continue to do our part to make a positive difference in the lives of those affected by the passage of devastating Dorian. Mr. Speaker, Seabreeze supports this bill, understanding that the Bahamas needs the world of help, and the world of help for us will make the world of difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Central and South Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today, as I always do, on behalf of the good people of Central and South Abaco, no matter wherever they are, whether they are still home, whether they are elsewhere in our archipelago, or beyond our nation on foreign shores. We have not forgotten them. I have not forgotten them. And no matter who you are or where you are still Abaconian, and you are still entitled and deserved to all the rights and representations that you are entitled to, Mr. Speaker. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, because I want to make a very distinct and clear point on one matter. Persons who have had to leave their homes in the aftermath of Dorian. They are not cowards. They have not abandoned anything. They did not choose this. This was forced upon them. It doesn't make them any lesser or more deserving of treatment and attention than anybody else, Mr. Speaker. And wherever you find us, Mr. Speaker, you may find frustration, uncertainty, heartbreak, but what you will not find are weak wills and brittle spirits. Mr. Speaker, we're cut from too good of a cloth for that, Mr. Speaker. The strength of our people has been tested. Its mettle has been tested. And if there's any nation and any group of people who can make it through a calamity, this, I don't even want to say catastrophic. I want to say apocalyptic, Mr. Speaker, because those who would have been on the ground would agree that is a much more an accurate description of what the feeling is when you walk through what once was thriving communities, homes, and families. So, Mr. Speaker, we have run through the gauntlet. We've been tested and battered. But you will find us, in the words of Henley, Mr. Speaker, bloodied but unbowed. And we will continue to press on. And I know all Abaconians will continue to press on and do what is best for themselves and their families, but their island and their home. There will always be a yearning to return to one's homeland, Mr. Speaker. I myself am one of the displaced persons from this storm, as is most of my immediate family. That is not to assert any sort of personal tragedy, but it is the story and the tragedy of most people in my constituency, Mr. Speaker. We live in what we all know and has always been the hurricane belt and the Atlantic. Our people have been through many storms, Mr. Speaker, but I dare say, at least in the history of our islands, I do not believe anyone can recall any event in our history so broad in its scale of those who are affected and so deep in the pain it's inflicted among our citizens. So, Mr. Speaker, I will make a very direct, with your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, not only to all my colleagues here, but throughout our nation and beyond our shores. We need many things, Mr. Speaker. We need your assistance. We need your commitment. We need your patience. We need your generosity. But more than anything, Mr. Speaker, we need your kindness. I have no doubt that our brothers and sisters, not only in our own nation, but far beyond, perhaps even our own hemisphere, they will hear the call and the cries of persons who are so desperate, but also so willing and resolute in rebuilding their homeland. So I make that plea to everyone, Mr. Speaker, and please remember, these are lives and families we're discussing. We have to treat everything, the level of dignity, respect, and decorum, to deliver not only for my own constituents, Mr. Speaker, because I realize this is far beyond my own constituency. Of course, the entire island of Abaco and the vast majority, most areas of Grand Bahama. Our people have suffered a heavy blow. And we will gain nothing at all. We will accomplish nothing at all by giving each other bloody noses and black eyes. We have because, Mr. Speaker, we live in a democracy. And the day you find yourself unable to criticize or complain or whatever, any of the terms someone would use, that's when you know you no longer live in a democracy. So, Mr. Speaker, it's our responsibility as elected representatives to hear and acknowledge that and address those deficiencies where they arise. But there is a fundamental difference, Mr. Speaker, between constructive criticism and being on part of the team. And when I say team, Mr. Speaker, I do not speak of any political party, color, creed, race, religion, or what other descriptors people usually use to turn one against the other. You're either working with and being a part of these great recovery efforts, or you are not. It is as simple and as fundamental as that. There is no us and them. There is no me and you. There is no red, yellow, or green. There are Bahamians and Abaconians and Grand Bahamians, and that's it. We need to help each other. So, Mr. Speaker, as we move towards the future, many of concerns of my constituents I would have raised previously in our last session, but I want to underscore something that's very important, and the Most Honorable Prime Minister, member for Killarney, would have spoke on this recently at the United Nations, which is our very precarious position when it comes to the uncertainty or perhaps unpredictability of these cataclysmic storms that seem to be ever further on the horizon. So, Mr. Speaker, I realize climate change, global warming, there are many different phrases and ways people use that term, but Bahamians, more than any other people, know and understand the intrinsic and symbiotic attachment between man and Mother Earth. Everyone knows what happens when you overfish a reef, or a once pristine beach that you used to visit as a child becomes polluted with garbage, or a mangrove that once housed our fisheries and other wildlife that we sustain and rely on becomes stagnant or is removed. So, Mr. Speaker, it's not only important for us under an administration or as legislators to push aggressively within our own laws and our own systems and our own nation for measures to combat this, such as the single plastic ban, which will come into effect, and other legislative measures to increase and support our commitment, but also to work with international partners and organizations who are also part of this fight. Many nations have not done even the steps that we have taken so far, Mr. Speaker. As a nation of less than 400,000 people in the Caribbean, we all know and understand we're probably one of the most fraction of a percentile of overall contributors to this great change, which is why it's important that we remain steadfast in our resolve at home and we commit to our allies and partners overseas in this struggle and this fight. We have to be resilient, Mr. Speaker, and we have to be smart about the way we do things. It doesn't just come down to, yes, we must rebuild, and we will rebuild. We have to rebuild smarter, more sustainable ways. We have to show the people of our nation and those far beyond our shores that we're doing our part, and we certainly hope they're willing to do theirs. With that said, being said, Mr. Speaker, turning to the amendment itself, I just want to, it would have been discussed by a great number of colleagues in this place already at this point. And I wish to assure all of my constituents or anyone hearing my voice regarding the, for lack of a better word, controversy or concern about the amendments that are being proposed and debated on here today. This is not about seizing property. This is not about armed personnel showing up at your door in the middle of the night. This is to prevent the loss of life and protect lives through what otherwise would have just been the negligence of one individual. Especially when we speak of, Mr. Speaker, children, the elderly, those with medical conditions who rely on consistent treatments or medications that, quite frankly, they would not have access to in the aftermath of storms such as the one that has recently struck us. So to put it perhaps very candidly, Mr. Speaker, it's your right to choose to endanger yourself, but it's not your right to endanger the lives of others. We have to look out for all of our citizens, and putting the legislation in place that allows the government to act quickly and legally within situations like these. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank a great many people. One almost does not want to begin thanking because of the fear of leaving one out. A shorter list would be people who were not to thank. That is the extent, Mr. Speaker, from both domestic and international. But especially, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues here. They've always been very responsive and understanding. And even though we may have disagreements, but they have always been there to assist me, to assist my constituents. I'd like to thank Samaritan's Purse, Team Rubicon, the RFA, Mount Bay, United States Coast Guard, and Department of Defense, Bahamas Air, the Jamaican Defense Force, the Dutch military detachment, our own law enforcement personnel, all the volunteer fire and rescue services throughout the islands, which right up until this very minute are still functioning in their communities, distributing basic goods and being there for the people who need them. Situations like these, Mr. Speaker, not only is it these large groups which, to be perfectly clear, are indispensable to the recovery efforts, Mr. Speaker. And I've had the opportunity to thank representatives of some of these organizations personally on behalf of my constituents, and I hope to do so with as many as possible, and to work with them and to help them help us. But there are also many others, Mr. Speaker, during the storm who would have done things that in their normal waking life you could never have pictured them doing. Acts of heroism, daring, risking their own lives for their fellow man or woman who, in many cases, they may have barely even known. There may never be a front page picture for them, Mr. Speaker, or a dedicated tribute or honor to the individuals. But they, Mr. Speaker, are heroes. And as we all know, we do not do the good things or the right thing for recognition, for fame, or credit. We do the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do. They are heroes, Mr. Speaker. I have a constituency full of heroes. So, Mr. Speaker, I will begin to conclude, but I just wanted to express a sincere thanks to whoever will listen to this now live or later on, all of those organizations, all of those individuals who turned an apocalyptic event that we've had into, out of that tragedy, to forge daring tales of heroism and bravery. It makes you feel very humble, Mr. Speaker, that I have the privilege to represent a constituency of heroes. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I would just like to relay once again to all of my constituents, no matter where you are, I'm still here for you. We are all still here for you. We will continue to work and fight and do everything we can to bring you the dignity and the livelihood that you've lost, and to rebuild ourselves together as we move forward. And to thank you, he has stepped out of the room now, but as the member for Freetown would have highlighted, very generously has allowed me to set up a temporary constituency office within the Freetown constituency office on Village Road. So that way, many of my constituents who, like myself, have had to find accommodation with family or friends in New Providence, to have a base of headquarters where they can come and make their concerns known, and we're a physical structure to give them not just a sense of closure, Mr. Speaker, but access, and to prove to them my determination that this is not just a short-term haul, Mr. Speaker. We are in this together for the long haul, but we can do it together. We will all be here for you. So God bless you, Mr. Speaker, and God bless all of you colleagues. God bless all of my constituents and the people of our great Commonwealth. Central and South Abaco supports this amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let the record show that I was never so proud to be the representative for West Grand Bahama and Bimini as I was prior to the passage of Hurricane Dorian, as well as after, and I remain today. I witnessed a community standing with and supporting each other like never before. I commend each and every constituent, church, government agency, corporate citizen, and civic organizations that assisted and ensured that lives were saved during and after the hurricane. We especially thank God for his covering. West Grand Bahama and Bimini could not bear another storm, and this time its impact, while severe, was not devastating. Let it be known, Mr. Speaker, that we were impacted. West End in particular experienced reported flooding of up to 6 feet of water in homes and businesses that were destroyed, as well as the north side of Bimini, rather Holmes Rock and Deadman's Reef. Bimini, Mr. Speaker, fared well, and for that, we are very, very grateful. Mr. Speaker, prior to the hurricane, there was much work to be done on the ground, and we gave everything that we could out of West Grand Bahama and Bimini in preparing our constituents for what was coming. Mr. Speaker, the police, the defense force, we all got together. I particularly wish to mention, Mr. Speaker, the work of the West End Police Station, led by the officer in charge, Mr. Floyd Bastian, Superintendent Floyd Bastian, who I, along with Mr. Speaker, took up to almost 6-7 hours on a given Friday before the hurricane and knocked on as many doors as we could, asking people to evacuate. There is much to be said, Mr. Speaker, when you are in a zone that has been hit over and over again, and you fear that the lives of the people would be at risk. And in many instances, Mr. Speaker, because so many have been through major storms before, they tend not to move. And so you ask yourself whether or not when you return, they would be alive. Mr. Speaker, many chose to stay in West Grand Bahama as they normally do. As much as we pleaded and begged them to leave, many stayed. But this, Mr. Speaker, shows the importance of exactly the bill that is before us. Mr. Speaker, I vividly remember going to a home in the north side of Deadman's Reef where a grandfather and his little grandchildren were there. And he spoke about the fact that he had always rode out the storm in that area. And I pleaded and pleaded to him that if he wished to stay, then by all means it's his choice, but to send the children, which he did. And for that, we were grateful and happy to go back to that home, and they were all alive. Mr. Speaker, there are always challenges before and after a storm. The Bahamas is not immune to situations that may arise, either before or after. Sometimes we learn in the process and also after the process. And this, Mr. Speaker, continues to be the norm as of today. Mr. Speaker, the importance of agencies such as social services and the rest cannot be overestimated. For a long time, we have approached hurricanes in somewhat of a relaxed mode because of the fact that for years we would see that many would have survived and come through. But this, Mr. Speaker, has demonstrated that hurricanes are not to be taken lightly, whether it is a hurricane category 1 and in this instance a category 5. Our mindsets must change about the way that Mother Nature can bring its wrath. And we have to get to a point, Mr. Speaker, where we realize that if we try to fight against it, we will always lose. That is not to say, Mr. Speaker, that we did not prepare. Nobody knew the impact of this storm, this hurricane. Meteorologists did not know what it would do. News anchors did not know what it would bring. Only God knew what would transpire. Mr. Speaker, this is an effort moving forward now in which this entire country will have to come together. As you would have heard earlier, either you are for or you're against. It's as simple as that. Either you are for or you are against the efforts. Mr. Speaker, we are so thankful for the international community. I have never seen such an overwhelming support of persons outside this country as I saw following the passage of Hurricane Dorian. You know, it made us realize that at the end of the day, we have to coexist, and that this world is no longer local, but it is global. We have to depend on the person to our left, to our right, to our front, and to our rear. We cannot live in isolation and believe that we are going to survive in this world with just us alone. And we are grateful for the international community and all that they would have done to assist the Bahamas. That goes to show, Mr. Speaker, how the world sees us. And I think we ought to be proud that the world responded the way it did in our time of need. Many countries don't receive that. Many countries do not get that support. That says a lot about who we are as a nation and who we are as a people. When you are looked at from the world as a nation, which you can just get just like that, without questions being asked, that goes to show that the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a nation that is respected by this world, and we will continue to be that way with this current government. The transparency that we continue and the accountability to promote. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about persons who would have assisted in this hurricane, there are many. Take, for example, Mr. Speaker, the Emergency Operations Center of 8 Mile Rock. Men and women who continue on a basis when a hurricane is coming to lend their support and volunteer and to risk their lives. I recall, Mr. Speaker, that going into the hurricane, we had one shelter in West Grand Bahama. One shelter. We have to realize, Mr. Speaker, that we are no longer in an era where we have buildings that house. We don't need buildings that house for shelters. We need shelters. We need shelters. It is good to say to others that you can go to a church, or you can go to a gymnasium, or you can go somewhere else and get shelter, but we have to build for the future. We have to build for the future. And so we are so thankful for those members of the EOC who, Mr. Speaker, at a point in time, had to go into the secret community at a church, which had never been compromised ever before. They had to go into that church and evacuate some 70-plus elderly residents to take them to the lone shelter in West Grand Bahama, which was the Bethel Deliverance Church that came on just a day before the hurricane. If God was not with us, I don't know who was. Mr. Speaker, it is awesome and great to know that you have colleagues and individuals who will come to your aid quickly. And West Grand Bahama and Bimini, as well as Grand Bahama, would have received direct assistance from our colleagues in Nassau, many of you who would have been working behind the scenes, and those who came over to Grand Bahama quite quickly. St. Barnabas, Tall Pines, we had also Seabreeze, and by extension, Elizabeth, who I personally would have spoken to over that course and who would have assisted significantly. And we are so grateful that Tall Pines even went door to door with me. St. Barnabas, we got on the back of a truck. I rode in the front, but you got on the back of the truck. he thought it was best that I go inside. So he protected me even in that. And we, right. And so it was amazing. And so to have that support, even through the ministries, the Minister of Health would have advised me as to what to do on the ground with the clinic, and the member for Seabreeze came over and empowered women by giving out building supplies and gift certificates. This is what community is about, Mr. Speaker. This is what it is about. Storms have a way of unearthing our humanity. It speaks to the heart of men. And in the end, we have to ask ourselves, when anything of this magnitude hits, who are we as a people? And for the persons that would have arisen and done what was needed, we say thank you, because of them, we are where we are today and moving forward. We will rise, Mr. Speaker. There is no doubt of the rubbish. There is no doubt that the debris that we experience and we see on a daily basis will be cleared, and there's no doubt that our vision for this country will come to fruition. Mr. Speaker, God has a way of bringing what he needs to bring forward what he needs to bring forward. We may have not thought about this bill in its entirety before that storm, but now we know that we have to prepare for the future in a way like none before. We have a country for our children to be able to live in, and to be able to know that at the end of the day, they have a government that will take everything that it would learn from this hurricane and prepare and make sure that they are safe. And I am sure, Mr. Speaker, that we are up for the task.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
We are up for the task,
Yes,
Mr. Speaker.
We are.
Many people continue to be displaced. At this moment in time, Mr. Speaker, our community is one in which we asked our constituents that when hurricane relief items started to come in, because we were not as impacted as others, such as Easton and Freeport, that we be mindful of the fact that in a time such as this, we need not to just think of ourselves, but to think of our neighbors. Mr. Speaker, God does not work with tight hands. God gives to those who gives freely. And when you give freely, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it's so amazing. Just one quick story. We were at our constituency office, and we had some relief items because we're now using that area as distribution hubs. And we were giving away items. And as I rode the bus with some young girls, one of the young girls said to me, she said, "Ms. Parker, why are you giving 2 cases of water, 3 cases of water other people need?" I said to her very, very simply, I said, "Listen to me." I said, when you give with a genuine heart, and when you give out of the grace of God, everything will be replenished. A case of water is amazing for those that don't have. But if you were able to give 2 as you move, do that. Mr. Speaker, do you know less than an hour later, I got a text stating that a trailer was on the way? I said, God will replenish. Just give. We sat on Monday at our constituency office on a holiday with everything we had in there, right to the last drop. I'm talking about little packets. We bagged and we packaged, and I said, I want it all gone. Every last drop to get to the people. And this is what we are doing in Grand Bahama and also in West Grand Bahama. NEMA is at a point, Mr. Speaker, as soon as it comes, it gets out of there. Let me tell you something. One constituent said to me when I went to their home, she said, "Ms. Parker, we have enough. I can't take any more." I promise you that was in West End. And for the honesty of that person to start coming forward, because other people would have just taken, not knowing that there may have been others without. And this is what we're promoting as we recover, Mr. Speaker, that if you have, don't hoard or don't stock up. God will replenish. You know your neighbor doesn't have, give it to your neighbor. This is what we're promoting moving forward, Mr. Speaker. Community has to come out of this. We all have sides and we all have colors that we prefer, but there has to be a melting pot at somewhere, sometime, so that this country will move into its destiny, Mr. Speaker. West Grand Bahama and Bimini, alone, Bimini, not affected this year. The first thing that Bimini said when they came out of it, people are calling us, they want to help. Bimini started to be utilized as a center where they can send things in. We were able to assist Fox Hill. Great. West End went into East End. Perfect. And this is what we're promoting in West Grand Bahama and Bimini, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that during a devastation, a serious time such as a hurricane, the importance of communications. We all experienced it. We experienced the outages and the disconnects and not being able to find or speak with family members. Mr. Speaker, this is so important. We cannot pretend that communications in this country is not important. We have to invest further into infrastructure and systems and entities that bring forward this. Technology is important. I can only imagine what it was like for those persons who wanted to hear from their loved ones and could not, Mr. Speaker. We have to strengthen our infrastructure to ensure that no matter what comes, we are able to communicate. And Mr. Speaker, I appeal to this government to look at communications as a part of its overall strategy in planning for the future. Because at the end of the day, what good is the country if we aren't able to connect? We have to be able to connect. I am so proud of the staff of the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas, especially the Northern Service in Freeport, Mr. Speaker. We were on the air 24/7. We never, ever stopped. Mr. Speaker, the dedication of that staff, we were compromised in the north. I'm talking about flooding where we lost equipment. As our reporters were on the air, our cameramen were in the studio mopping. But yet, we remained on the air. We provided that information that is required of us as a broadcasting entity. And we saved lives. Because when people were not able to connect, they were calling the radio station, who was calling the rescuers, and making sure that people were rescued. So the Northern Service played an integral role in rescuing people and ensuring that people were brought to safety. And I am so proud of the staff of Freeport Northern Service. Mr. Speaker, we cannot deny the fact that we are in a global environment and climate change is real. Even though as a country, we contribute a negligible amount toward climate change, a reported 0.01% to global greenhouse emissions. The projected impacts of climate change on the Bahamas is inevitable. We see it in our shorelines, and we see it now in our weather systems. Mr. Speaker, many people would have laughed before about a hurricane coming and treated it as if it was a vacation day. They were happy to hear that a storm was coming because they were able to stay home and just chill out. Mr. Speaker, we can't think like that anymore. We have no idea what is approaching us. We have to be able to put in place anything that can mitigate the impact. I often go into West End right now, Mr. Speaker, and I've been begging, and I'm going to continue to beg as their voice for the seawalls of West End. I will not let up on that. Reason being, Mr. Speaker, we can go in that community and we can rebuild our houses. We can do whatever we have to do on the other side of the sea. But then what happens, Mr. Speaker? It all comes crumbling right back down. We have to be able to mitigate at least the impact being as severe as it has been. And we are going to continue to ask and appeal for those seawalls in that community. Mr. Speaker, we have to take a proactive approach in order to survive by implementing policies and introducing controls that will allow the country to adapt to the adverse impacts of the phenomenon. Mr. Speaker, identifying new flood zones and implementing more stringent building codes to withstand sea level rise is necessary. It is necessary. We have some of the strongest building codes, mind you, at this point. But the world and the weather, it's changing. And so must we in the way we are going to approach it. We need knowers of our era, Mr. Speaker. We need those persons who will think beyond today and prepare for tomorrow. No matter what they may say, Mr. Speaker, we need to bring forth new and innovative ideas that will protect our people and our country and all that we invest in. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that under this administration, those will come forward. I feel it in my heart, and I know that this storm and this hurricane did not just come to bring us, Heavenly Father, devastation. I know that it will bring us back to where God wants us to be. Mr. Speaker, lives were lost. Families were displaced. Shelter is needed. Many remain disoriented. Mr. Speaker, while we are bending, we will not break. While we are bending, we will not break. Mr. Speaker, we are bending just enough to lift our heads to the rising sun. That's where we are, Mr. Speaker. Knowing that God will not put more on us than we can bear. And so we have to decide, Mr. Speaker, strongly that either we are going to run a country or we are going to run amok. Mr. Speaker, heaven knows that the only thing that will bring us out of this is for us to pull together and make sure that moving forward, we are stronger than we were before. Step by step, Mr. Speaker, community by community. The formula, Mr. Speaker, for bringing this country where we need to be, we start with the citizen, we go to the community, and there is the country. We are calling for citizens of this Bahama land to take your knowledge, to take your volunteerism, to take your ideas to the relevant places that they need to be. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we are calling for citizens of this country to decide that we are strong and that we are not going to let anything tear us down, not even a Category 5. We will be discussed for years to come. And in the discussions that are coming up, let it be said that there goes a nation that bended but never, ever, ever was broken. Mr. Speaker, West Grand Bahama and Bimini supports this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I stand today to make a brief contribution to the Disaster Preparedness and Response Amendment Bill 2019. But I'd like to proffer my very brief comments by acknowledging and thanking a few people on behalf of the great people of the constituency of Mangrove Key South and Central Andros. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to the member for Elizabeth the Honorable Dr. Sands, and his fine staff at the Ministry of Health, who assisted just a few days ago when we had the carbon monoxide poisoning at the Central Andros High School that affected students primarily from the Bearing Point to the Central Andros community, having them airlifted, along with Dr. Clark and others who were domiciled in the district. But not only that, he, along with the Ministry of Education, allowing persons to come to New Providence to get proper care, Mr. Speaker, proper accommodation, and also being able to visit medical facility here in New Providence, I think namely South Beach Clinic, and being returned home safely. I joined the parents of Central Andros at the Bearing Point Primary School last week, Wednesday, as they said thank you to the Honorable Member for Elizabeth and his fine staff. At this time, I'd like to salute you publicly for your great work, so thank you. Also, I'd like to thank Ms. Michelle Boleg, the DS for the entire district, Ms. Emily Miller, and Mrs. Thompson, and other leading citizens in the community who also are part of this process. Also, I'd like to officially extend the condolences to the former Member of Parliament for Bamboo Town, the Honorable Tennyson R.G. Wells, a patriot, freedom fighter in his own right, and one who would have assisted me and gave me good and sober advice on any number of occasions. He and the Honorable Algernon S.B.B. Allen. And it was good to see him along with Milady Justice Anita at the state-recognized funeral for the Honorable Tennyson Wells just last week, Friday. And I must say that he and the man who we call Buzzy were both very good friends. And they were both very good friends of the former Prime Minister, Perry G. Christie. I leave 2012 right there for the time being, but they were all very good friends of Perry G. Christie, I leave it like that, not Abercrombie. You'll think about the rest. You're a smart young man. So, also I note, as I heard the member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini, someone who's also attached to that community, the family of the late Dr. Deswell Coakley, who served as police officer, director of immigration, consul general to New York, and also was a standard bearer for the PLP, and of course served in the Honorable Upper House. I want to say to his family that we are saddened by his passing. As we are passing on condolences quickly to the family of the late Blanche Forbes of Kemps Bay Andros, who was interred on Saturday past at the historic Mount Zion Baptist Church where the Reverend Marion Forbes serves as a senior pastor. We were there to join with Bishop Randy Fraser, Orion, Raymond, Mary, and Pat, and other members of the Forbes family in South Andros to say farewell to this great soul in the community of South Andros. Finally, I must say to my friend, the Reverend Dr. Philip McPhee, whose church celebrates his 73rd anniversary, and he was saddened by the fact that the member for St. Anne's never attended the service. But I must say that I want to commend him and his fine congregation. I want to wish him the best as they go forward. He and his wife, Sister Charlene, and many others in that historic and heritage community of Maine and Grantstown. And also, Mr. Speaker, sadly, we must note the untimely passing of a young man. My sister wept the other day on the passing of a young man we simply called Bruno on the Fort Hill, who met us untimely demise just the other night. Sad. And so, Stacy, I didn't forget you, and Junior Lee and Arrow and Peter and the boys and McCulloch and Masons this evening were watching by Miss Simonette's bar just next door to my mom's house. I didn't forget. And so for Bruno and his parents, I would be sure to offer my condolences today, but also to try my best to attend the funeral and be a part of that, for that community that I'm a part of. I'd like to, before I move on to my very brief commentary, also to commend the member for Port Charlotte. I was glad to see one of my local leading citizens, Mr. Norbert L. Ramming, also being honored at the National Heroes ceremony the other day at Government House. And I must say that the member for Port Charlotte has shown me that he's grown into being a nationalist, intelligent, and has been exhibiting much more sobriety as a relatively young member in this place. But I must tell him to note one thing in presenting these awards next year, if that would be God's willing. and for members to hear me and hear me clearly. As I am driving in the car in the community of Andros and listening to the broadcast, what bothers me as a nationalist is when these events are being broadcast, all you hear is that the commentary is that you go in red or you go in yellow, and this one serves as a minister in the PLP administration, serving the FNM administration. It sounds bad. This is a national award. That's why Jamaica's ahead of us many times, and Barbados. We're still too polarizing around national signs and symbols. I think anytime you're honoring people who've left the scene and they're being recognized posthumously, or they're still being recognized after they've left this place and other places and in our society and served civically, socially, and otherwise, they should be, if they served here, they would have served as a government in the administration of the Honorable Hubert Ingham or the period from so to so and so, even not even calling the former Prime Minister's name. I think it does something, it doesn't do the award full justice in my view. And I don't like hearing it in the commentators even saying it. Oh yes, he was a minister in Ingham administration. Oh yes, he was a minister in Christian. I think we need to get beyond those things when it comes to national awards. This is my humble submission. I feel strongly about it. And I think it's a noble gesture. And I think we need to now take our game, Mr. Speaker, to another level. I feel very strongly about it. Once again, to Mr. Raming and all of those who were honored. One day I hope my name would be called. I don't know, but
it will be.
But you know, one of these days, the time and place for there.
Which administration?
I must say this afternoon, as my people are watching in South Andrews, they're still waiting. The member for Long Island is not here. The member for Carmichael is not here. We're still waiting for the completion of our potable water in the community of South Andros. Till the road we trod lead unto our God. Mr. Speaker, this afternoon, I'm just from South Andros on the weekend, as I mentioned, for the funerals and the Conquest and Mars, we had lots of rain. And I promised the people publicly in the community of South Andros, especially his cousin Michael Flowers, that I would soon be asking and almost compelling the honorable member for Bamboo Town, a hometown boy who has strong lineage in the community of Drigsell, to please come home, come back home. Andros is calling you to please come back home, Renwood Wells. You and I will be on that flight. And he said he and I, Norbert Raming, and also I must say Ms. Roland in Drigsell, he said he and I would be on that flight together. So you all can sit down comfortably and listen. He would have said it openly just now on the House Assembly floor. But I would also say, Mr. Speaker, this afternoon, the roads are very bad in South Andros. My roads. Mr. Speaker, there are certain things you're supposed to protect me from and don't have to go on the record. Mr. Speaker, my roads are very, very bad in the community of South Andros and also South Central Andros, from the Andros Town Airport to Coakley Bight, from Drigsell to Mars Bay. I am asking the member for Kalani, who serves as the first among equals in this honorable place, as he once again would be traversing the islands of the Bahamas pretty shortly, he has announced, that he would please allow, since they put all the asphalt in North Andros, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't accept only the tar, but please give us little something in South and Central Andros. That's all I'm asking for. Our roads are in bad shape on a very serious note. I'll be in Central Andros on Sunday coming. And anytime you have to leave from Andros Town to go to Cargill Creek, Bearing Point, bad shape. People are on the road flat all over the place, catching flats. South Andros is the same. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, I would want the member for Kalani to note that we are very concerned about the roads in South Andros and also South Central in my constituencies. Once again, although we can talk about the road in philosophical terms and be proverbial and even use political sophistry, as we anticipate community capacity building in our community, economic and social resilience, we hope in the community of South Andros, Central Andros, and Mango Key for better roads, like we have seen in the community of North Andros. Mr. Speaker, once again, the objects and reasons for this amended bill seeks to empower the Prime Minister to make certain necessary orders. And Clause 2 of the bill inserts new sections 27A to 27D into the Principal Act to provide for evacuation and relief orders. Also offers rebate on business license fees, waiver of value-added tax, exemptions to excise tax, or any other tax payable under any law. Mr. Speaker, Dorian was and still is, in its aftermath, a hurricane long to be remembered. I want to, as we would have given salutations and thank you notes across the floor today, thank Kelvin Hughes and the staff at Channel 10 in Miami. They would have given the Bahamas lots of good coverage. Also, I'd like to thank the ZNS team. Although the staff in Nassau would have gotten on things a little late, in my view, to some degree, the better part of the broadcast team in New Providence would have gotten to things sometime somewhat a bit late. I like what happened in Freeport, and I joined a member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini, because in Grand Bahama they were very structured in their broadcasting during Hurricane Dorian. I think we need to, as we select persons who will be broadcasting during these very pivotal moments, I won't go too far with this, but the Bahamas has grown and moved in a different direction. We cannot be taking these matters very lightly, and therefore people who are going to be on air broadcasting and being a part of the entity that I would have been a part of for all of my formative years, my only job would have been at the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. We cannot no longer take people's lives and their very existence lightly. If you're not prepared, thorough, succinct, and organized, you should not be a part of broadcasting teams going forward. I leave it right there, Mr. Speaker. A word to the wise sufficient. I had a chance, Mr. Speaker, to visit the community of North Abaco with party leader, member for Angleton, and others. Very sad. You landed, we went into Cherokee Airport. Videos and montages and photos can't tell the story. There's still a scent of smell, a dash of death in the air. Cars, trucks are all strewn along the road. Buildings, dwelling homes, commercial centers are all virtually destroyed. We had a chance to go across to Hopetown and saw the same in Hopetown. Much damage, gas, containers on the docks that was slightly pushed up, boats in the mangrove shrubs and the beach on rocks, dry land. You say, Lord, how can these boats this size get up on these high docks? Manawal Key on the entrance. You see the same thing. I considered Mr. Speaker, as a non-boating person. I would normally be on the rock fishing, not too much with the boat all the time. But what I call a really sheltered harbor. You see the same there. Damage and challenged conditions everywhere. I want to say thanks to this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, to the staff at the Hibiscus Cafe. I don't know if you know that cafe. It's me. I'm a real hometown boy, and I observe everywhere I go. And while I was there, they treated us well and gave us some good down-home soup, and they recognized the hometown boy. And while I was there, we heard how persons were frightened and were careful for their very survival. Mr. Speaker, I must once again concur with the member for West Grand Bahama. We have, I think, today quite a bit in common. I feel very strongly about this point. BTC, Mr. Speaker, left us somewhat ashamed. We are in Abaco, and a live tower is up at the end of Manawal Key, and BTC has no signal. You land here in New Providence, Mr. Speaker. I'm driving. I look at government buildings. I take it very serious. That's why when some things didn't go well under my administration, they had some problems with me. And I'm very strong. I grew up with old people sweeping up the yard, painting up building, and keeping the yard and your house and your clothes clean always pressed. I'm very strong on those things. Manners and behavior carried through the world. I'm driving along and I see BDC's building today on the main JFK Drive. This was the pride and joy of this country as long as I could remember. But Telco, we call it all those years. And you see it today, and it's disappointing. Look, no matter what they say about Leon Williams, he had his shortcomings, or whatever you want to say, but Leon Williams would have been a transformational leader for the Bahamas Telecommunications Corporation. I look at Bob Bartlett, Michael Simmons, who I would have known, Asa Ferguson, Roscoe Davis, Alderman Isaac, many others. I would have been there as a chief shop steward in the 1980s as a young man with Keith Archer. And to see what I'm seeing at Batelco today makes me very ashamed. BTC could do much better. And I am hoping that we could see some new things coming out of BTC. Some new things coming out of BTC. And the member for West Grandma, I don't lay it on your shoulder. It is not you. I understand what I'm saying. But I expect better from BTC. You mentioned the fact that we must have telecommunications redundancies. I totally agree. There's no way in the world a lie should be beating BTC. Not in the Bahamas. It shouldn't be happening. And Damon Black Boy, no pun intended, but that's the real, that's why I feel I'm an ethnocentric Bahamian. I'm strong about that. There are certain things. Bahamian, when it comes to BDC, that's like Bahamas there with me. I fly Bahamas there, we're going to Miami, going to Bahamas there. Okay, fine, I'm finished with that. In New Orleans, Mr. Speaker, in 2005, the levees failed, flooding surrounded all the parishes. 80% of all the structures sustained some water damage. 800,000 citizens were displaced. Repairs estimated to be at $125 billion in New Orleans. Like in New Orleans in Hurricane Katrina, warnings were not, in my view, publicized strongly enough. Some people had just not heard about the warnings. And I think to some degree, we could have avoided some of these catastrophic disposition that our people are caught in today. But here we are today. Abaco and Grand Bahama, our second and third commercial pillars of our country from a GDP perspective, are obviously affected. We must now be resilient economically and socially. And we must now be focused on where do we go after Hurricane Dorian. I went to Abaco, like I said. I saw the Defense Force officers sitting there waiting and observing their protocol as we went across. We as a people cannot afford to fail the Abacos nor Grand Bahama. We know of climate change. We know of high tide or king tide, many will call them flood tides. Coastal erosion is real. Beach erosion is real. Hurricanes are going to become more severe, but it must take now more preparation at the governmental level for proper evacuation and protection of our people. Mr. Speaker, when one looks at the Bahamas going forward, Andros must be considered the evacuation center for the Bahamas, in my view. For example, quickly let's take a look at it. There's a facility that Mr. Rex Roller, a known businessman, has in North Andros. If that is properly surveyed and looked at, it could be used as a major evacuation center during just these times, along with a second such center being built or constructed in South Andros, where there's large land mass. There's a certain level of elevation that we can use in this country. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, we must now look at the Abacos in Grand Bahama. We either go big or we go home. I must know the fact that if we're going to look at it, especially Abaco with major infrastructural damage, we must now look at putting electrical supplies, for example, maybe underground. What about solar and renewable sources being considered? We must now find new ways, Mr. Speaker, to return life to a sense of normalcy in the most expeditious way for the people of Grand Bahama and Abaco. They don't really want to be in New Providence, those I've met. They don't want to be here. So we can't come here too much longer talking about budgetary shortfall, fiscal disposition, so and so. As a matter of fact, the people who are from these communities want to hear what we're going to do about constructing homes. They want to hear that the government is now reaching out in collaboration with the opposition to possible home construction agencies in South Carolina, in Florida somewhere, and who are going to be able to come in and now show that they can get back to their old roots where they want to be. They want to be back in Abaco. When I spoke with them, this is what they said. We must face this. And so therefore, they've come here, they're renting homes, and let me tell you the truth. Like two ladies told me that you could come and stay with your cousins and your family in town for a little while. After 2 or 3 weeks, they get tired of you. And they go rent car for you, that means it's time for you to go. Those people in Abaco and Grand Bahama want to go back home. And the government, I'm going to say it once again, we got to find a way to get people back where they're comfortable. That's the reality here. And people know that's the real truth. I would like to also join in saying thank you to those agencies, relief agencies such as the Red Cross, Samaritan's Purse, all of our friends from all over the world, the churches, and those who've given philanthropically, and those who've given also anonymously who don't want to be identified. We must repopulate these communities, And we must also encourage neighborhood and community-based organizations to assist in these efforts. Insurance companies should be glad to extend an olive branch and act with a level of alacrity in assisting these claims in their assessment so that these people could be returned to these communities. As we moved around, we heard that some 50 to 60+% of the people in these areas affected were either uninsured or underinsured. As a matter of fact, the gentleman, when I was in Manawak, he said to me, quite candidly, he had to make a decision whether he would maintain his health insurance or pay for his home. So therefore, he had to keep his home. So therefore, he wanted to keep his home, pardon me. So he had to drop his health insurance. This is real. So here we are. Commercial banks should therefore be very grateful, should bend over backwards, pardon me, Mr. Speaker. We would use the Bahamian vernacular. In the spirit of forgiveness, knowing that things are tight in these areas, so that persons could have real relief in their mortgages and other such payments to those loyal clients. Now, if you know was to pay on time and you weren't a good client, you can't come looking to benefit from all these benefits and fringe benefits that could be had. You know, that kind of, you know what's to pay on time. You got that boat in Abaco and you went out for the 2 or 3 crawfish season and they ain't pay nothing. So you can't come down on benefits in this process. I'm saying you were a good client. People who are here in New Providence at the various centers, Mr. Speaker, they've been eating corned beef, white rice, had some water, got toiletries, toothpaste and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, that's all well and good. They want to hear the plan, how they're going to get back to Abaco, they want to get back to Dundastown, Murphytown, Marsh Harbor, Cherokee, Manawaki, Guanakee, Treasure Key, they want to get back to all them keys in Abaco, East Grand Bahama, Smiths Point, all. They want to go back home. They don't like town like that. Okay, fine. So we got to fix them docks quickly. We got to remove all them derelict vehicles quickly, and we must restore electricity faster to these communities. I like the report from East Abaco, and we're hearing that there's some levels of normalcy back in Freeport. Water supplies must be, once again, there must be some quick, South Abaco, pardon me. But I'm saying that we must have the water situation in Grand Bahama itself rectified post-haste. We got to fix the water. You can't help people. I got 2 or 3 calls in Grand Bahama. People still have to go and get water by the jug because the water is virtually affected on me. I don't want to say contaminated or salt in Grand Bahama. So we got to fix that. And you got to fix it. Fix it quick. Okay, well, fine, okay. Well, I must say, you know, Mr. Speaker, I scorched out, the member for English knows I scorched off a whole page and a half this morning because a member for Marathon this morning, they were very sober. I didn't talk with him, but God is a good God. I had a little different talk on this. You know, I was going to do a little down home, but he and I was on Chancellor, he was on Irving Hall. But he came this morning in a very sober and dignified. I sent him a note, and I commended him. I learned some things from some people. There was a man from North Abaco, a member for Bain and Grandson, who's now passed, who told me how to do things with dignity and honor when someone does well. They did it to me, and I learned that. I sent him a note, and I commended him. As a senior man, I commended him. I said, Marathon, because you did well. I commend you. And so, today, he acknowledged the fact that Equinor, some 4,000 acres were affected, Mr. Speaker. 175 acres affected by the crude oil. 119,000 gallons of oil spill in the forest and other areas have been affected. And I want to say that we all in this together. We want to fix Grand Bahama, and my friend, a member for East Grand Bahama, the Honorable K. Peter Turnquest, I want to wish him the best. I plan to go to Grand Bahama if all goes well next week. And I'll ride if all goes well. I remember for Bambutang, one of those red plates. I've been riding in the red plate since the last election. But you know, I would, as a senior man, I shouldn't be begging for a red plate if I go to Grand Bahama. When I go to Grand Bahama, there are certain courtesy that should be extended to me as a third-time member elected to this place. I'm a senior member in here. So when I land next week, I want a red car at the airport to pick me up and drive me around Grand Bahama. And I want a member for Kalani to hear it loud and clear. I'm a part of the governing process of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I don't want it. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, there are certain voices that should be blocked from my microphone. I don't want people that get itching ears sometime, you know. People get itching. I'm an island boy. People get itching ears. You a minister voice with him, minister voice this now?
Honorable member.
Yes, sir.
Do you need a 10-minute suspension to consider that proposal?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, I can only do that to you because you're my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We lose one week again.
King Brave, all hands on deck. I'm ready, King Brave. Oh boy. Oh my God. No, can I please be seated? Mr. Speaker, I must move quickly to the issue that is a very emotive one, this whole issue of our Haitian brothers and sisters who have been affected and legally what is happening there too. I must say that we in the Bahamas are people who are very open-minded and forbearing. And we are open-minded. We allow everyone to join us. Over 65 different nationalities are here. And we want all those who are regularized to enjoy the benefits of our beautiful Bahama land. I'm not xenophobic at all. But I would also say quickly to those who had some notions in the back of their mind, I want the record to reflect that I would not be supporting any notion of no other party under any other nationality being formed in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I would not stand in this honorable place and allow it to be done while I serve in this place or anywhere else. I would speak about it and speak candidly to it. So I want the word it is for you to be told, to be foretold, to be forewarned. The Bahamas for Bahamians, no matter how you're here, if you're regularized, you're paper, whatever it is, you're married to somebody, you're regularized, you're true to Bahamian, whatever, you're a Bahamian. And any party in the Bahamas is going to be a party that comes under a branding of something to do with the Bahamas. Nothing else. That's it. We are one Bahamian and one Bahamas. It ain't going to be nothing different. If you ain't no Bahamian party, you ain't going to be no party in this country as long as I live in. That's the way that is to be. Mr. Speaker, I must end big because the future beckons the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. As a senior man, I need 2 more minutes. Katrina, they lost over 200,000 vehicles, Mr. Speaker, in metropolitan New Orleans. So the average Bahamian virtually has a house, family, car, a job, along with their faith. So we are vulnerable. Yes, we are. We are in a hurricane zone, Mr. Speaker. So we need, when our leaders speak, to speak with a level of clarity and a sense of patriotism and national understanding to the helm, at the helm of our country in the various sectors, with a spirit of team, work, and a collective will. So I now refer to the collective refrain that we would always use, together, yes, we can. I note the fact that the member for Cat Island would have commiserated with the fact that he and the member for Kalani did not seem to be reaching each other on the telephone. The member for Kalani, although the member for Cat Island is not here present, I would hope going forward that would never have to be spoken about again in this honorable place. Because if we're going to build the Bahamas where we're all going to be on the same page, we'll have our differences here and there. But when it comes to something such as this, where the country is affected adversely, there should be no separation among us as Bahamians. So I hope going forward I would love to hear anything further, especially in matters of national interest and national import. Our building designs, we should be looking at those very closely. All those bright Bahamians who are abroad at schools in America, and also in the European area, and also in Canada. Are we going to build on stilts in low-lying areas? What about the building codes and structures to stand over 200-mile winds? Our road constructions, our window and protection and shelter protection. Our bridges maybe should be built higher. And someone, an engineer said to me, I'll say a Caucasian gentleman said to me on Bamboo Town, that we need to have some floating bridges in some of these communities. We need to engage construction professionals and laymen, electricians, carpenters, masons, and others. But most importantly, I want to say to our young men, that this is the time now, Kalani, for us to engage the young men of our country, especially those in the heritage community. They should be jumping on the plane. If it takes us to have to use Bahamas there to get them to Abaco to rebuild our country, we should get our young men of color especially to build our country going forward. So I think we need to look at this very closely. We need to build a resilient community. I'll be out in your way in 30 seconds, Mr. Speaker. Understanding our vulnerabilities, leveraging our community assets, redefining how and where we would build with a business and survival mindset in the forefront in our new developments. Also accurately apprise ourselves to the cost of inaction. And we must do that. Because we can have states where things are not done, and we don't calculate these things. Designed with natural systems and with supplies that are conducive to our environment. I must say quickly, Mr. Speaker, if we're going to be building for our Haitian brothers and those who are going to be a part of us in the Abacos, maybe the member for North Abaco would notify that we should use what we saw when we were in New Orleans and also what we saw in the Overtown community, build with a certain design in mind. Even the younger people in New Providence, like my daughter Faisal and others, they didn't necessarily want no house in a big old yard. But we now, like what we saw in Tokyo while we were there about 3 years ago, build fashionable areas at a certain standard that would make young people want to be a part of these communities. And we must do the same in Abaco. We must now take the trend setting. People can't only see government as being 20th century. We got to be progressive minded, 21st century, building in a certain kind of context that not for Haitian national or Haitian brothers and sisters, anyone else, but Bahamians to want to go to Abaco and be proud to go to work and be productive citizens in Abaco because the living standards are very good. We must take that, and I'll be glad to be a part of an effort to do the same, especially in Abaco and Eastern Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, I must note the fact that finally, in 2016, Global Climate Risk Index showed that between 1995 to 2014, more than 525,000 people died as a direct result of approximately 15,000 extreme weather events. The total amount loss incurred were over some US $2.97 trillion. By the way, the government, we must note the fact that there's suffering, there's dislocation in our society, but I note the fact that we must now come together, do some things differently, and I note the fact that the government must deal with this issue. Mr. Prime Minister, you're sitting here, this issue that people keep on texting with all day, people want to know at the end of the day, it was made light off to some degree this morning. But Bahamians want to know how many persons would have lost their lives in the Abaco and Grand Bahama community. That's an issue that continues to haunt your administration. We got to deal with it. And I think we need to come and deal. I think between you and the member for Elizabeth, say something close to it, because there are too many theories out there. And it haunts our country, and it saps too much energy with people still talking about it on social media and the talk shows. And we need to find a level of redress to that issue, because there are too many. We heard the comments of the former Prime Minister. So what I'm saying is that it's out there. You go to Starbucks, you go to the food store, you go to a funeral service, people are asking the same question. Mr. Prime Minister, it takes too much from the national psyche for people to still be talking about it. We must deal with it and come close and be direct on this issue. How many persons would have lost their lives tragically in the hurricane? Say something that could clear up something, because people are not believing the numbers that we're hearing. Let's build big. We need to put something on the ground in a meaningful way. Garden Hills, put a little something on the ground now. We got to put something on the ground. People need to feel this up, and they're getting a little jittery and a little frustrated. Finally, we must utilize, protect, and upgrade the ecosystem services, without compromising their value to people and the environment. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the day, in my final 20 seconds, when we can go back and celebrate in the community of Abaco and Grand Bahama, especially East Grand Bahama. We look forward to the day when these once fledgling and burgeoning communities return to some level of productivity, social and economic recovery and revitalization soonest as we rebuild in the Northern Bahamas. God bless the Abacos. God bless Grand Bahama, especially East Grand Bahama, as we look forward to a brighter day as we once again come together and sing from that old mantra that we left many years ago on Fort Charlotte, together, as we say, and we move forward, upward, onward, together. Mr. Speaker, the member for South, Mangrove Key, and Central Andros is much obliged to be a part of this most memorable bill today in the Honorable House of Assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. As many?
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, just a moment, please.
Disgusting, huh? As many. Chair recognizes the member for Garden Hills.
Thank you so much. So it's difficult to speak after the hometown boy, the MP for South Andros, and his very powerful presentation today. But nevertheless, I will try my best as I rise today to support this disaster preparedness and response Amendment Bill 2019 in my capacity as the Member of Parliament for the Garden Hills constituency and as the Minister of the Public Service and National Insurance. I rise to thank the Almighty God for his mercies and for the resolve of the people of this country in the face of this utter devastation on the islands of Grand Bahama and Abaco. The prophet Jeremiah proclaimed in the book of Lamentation, "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassion faileth not. They are new every morning." And then he says, "Great is thy faithfulness." And so in the midst of it all, we must take time to acknowledge our faithful God and to continually seek his direction and guidance in everything that we do. So, Mr. Speaker, Hurricane Dorian challenged our resolve as a nation and as a people. Some may have chosen to focus on the negative, but the storm brought forth many examples of what it truly means to be a Bahamian. Our people exemplified our national motto of forward, upward, onward, together. The world watched as ordinary citizens stepped up to the plate and became national heroes. I wish to publicly acknowledge and say thanks. Thank you to the unsung heroes who rescued persons using their personal boats, jet skis, and private aircraft. Thank you to the persons on social media who helped to organize the rescue efforts. A special thank you to all of you who took in your brothers and your sisters who were displaced by the storm or volunteered your time, energy, and resources to the relief effort. Mr. Speaker, Timothy Gibson penned the words, "See how the world marks the manner of our bearing." This great tragedy, which has caused great suffering, destruction, and distress, have brought us together as Bahamians, and I'm so proud to call this nation my home. In terms of the private sector, the public sector, Mr. Speaker, I am deeply moved by the tireless efforts made by civil servants. The Member of Parliament for East Grand Bahama and the Deputy Prime Minister expressed his sincere gratitude for the support of public officers throughout the country, especially those who helped in Grand Bahama. And I said to him the other day, I support every word he said. Mr. Speaker, in the days leading up to the hurricane, NEMA, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and many other agencies worked day and night in preparation for the impending storm. They worked without complaint, without reservations, without clamoring for compensation. Hundreds of public officers left their families to help their fellow Bahamians weather the storm.
In the immediate aftermath, the response was even more passionate. Without knowing the extent of the devastation or the working conditions that they would face, I'm reliably informed that nurses, members of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and other public officers who are fighting for an opportunity to volunteer their services in Abaco and East Grand Bahama. The public officers who did make it over, and those who stayed on the islands, worked shifts in excess of 20 hours a day, without power, without running water, or without even the proper food rations. I spoke personally, Mr. Speaker, to some nurses, customer officers who worked in Abaco. They told me about their commitment, their willingness to serve and to provide assistance to the residents of Abaco. I was truly impressed at the level to which they had elevated themselves to providing services and support for their colleagues, their family members, and other members of the community. This indeed, Mr. Speaker, was and is a moment in time that expressed the brilliance, the dedication, the tenacity of public officers. Mr. Speaker, public officers often get criticized by some members of the public and so many times by us politicians. We always speak about their shortcomings. So it is important for me today, Mr. Speaker, to speak to their leadership, their hard work, and the dedication that they showed during this national crisis. And I take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to tell their story, to give voice to what they did, because they deserve every single moment, every single opportunity that they get for showing their hard work and unflinching, Mr. Speaker, when confronted with their life. There are too many agencies to name, Mr. Speaker, individually. But I do appreciate sincerely the efforts of persons from the uniformed branches, social services, the medical profession, NEMO, the Met Office, the Ministry of Public Works, the permanent secretaries, the Family Island administrators, and the public officers serving from our neighboring communities in Caricom. These individuals and groups who, in spite of their own personal aches and pains, in spite of their own traumatic experience, in spite of some of them losing family members and close friends, in spite of the dangers and risks involved, in the midst of this unprecedented tragedy, these unsung heroes demonstrated once again that they are the glue that hold our proud country together. Every day they showed up, Mr. Speaker, and today they continue to show up to help their fellow Bahamians. Reverend Dr. Philip Raming said it best when he wrote, "We are one people, united in love and in service." Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that I am so proud of these courageous Bahamians who came together to save the lives of scores of individuals, because in the words of one young Bahamian man, I is a Bahamian, signifying the spirit of resilience and courage of Bahamians everywhere. So, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the Ministry of Public Service, the unprecedented nature of this hurricane required us to revise several of our existing policies while still following the rule of law. We wanted to do everything in our power to increase the overall well-being of civil servants, and our communities affected by the storm. Our hardworking team at the Ministry of Public Service engineered a holistic approach to helping our affected brothers and sisters in the service. Yes, it is still the goal of the ministry to maximize productivity, but sensitivity and compassion under these extraordinary circumstances is a must. And so, Mr. Speaker, in the wake of such a traumatic event, it would be unreasonable for the government to expect these persons who've already suffered so much to report to work and function normally. The first step we took, therefore, was to ensure that individuals, groups, and family members received counseling sessions. And these sessions were available to those public officers directly affected by the storm. In these sessions, Mr. Speaker, they had a safe space to confidentially express their feelings, to share their stories without judgment or exploitation. The response I have personally received showed that those who attended so far were eternally grateful for the opportunity to attend these sessions. And despite their experiences, they are now ready to go back to rebuild their lives and their communities. Mr. Speaker, the Free National Movement government is quite aware of the potential psychological impact and the stress it is on these responders. Therefore, we've extended the offer to all public officers impacted by the storm. And we ask them to consider seeking some advice or counsel offered free of charge by the Ministry of Public Service. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Public Service also sought to relieve any uncertainty that public officers would have had about their employment status. Consequently, we encourage the agencies to rotate staff members as best they could to the most convenient location. In this way, temporary arrangements could be made without the red tape of the bureaucracy, and the staff members could recover as quickly as possible. Our government, Mr. Speaker, wants to empower these public officers who are affected as best we can to rebuild their lives. In order to accomplish this, several outdated policies needed to be amended, not just for this tragedy, but as a precedent for any future disaster. While we continue to collaborate with the Ministry, the Attorney General, and the Ministry of Finance, the following provisions were made to help to ease the burden of our affected public officers in Abaco and Grand Bahama. Firstly, the Ministry of Finance announced a salary advance equivalent to 2 months' salary for permanent and pensionable officers to be repaid over a period of 2 years. This is in accordance with the provisions under the General Orders 1256 to 1260. Secondly, a lump sum payment of $1,000 to all public officers and contract workers affected by the hurricane in Abaco and Grand Bahama. Let me repeat that, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
A lump sum payment of $1,000 to all public officers and contract workers for the government affected by the hurricane in Abaco and Grand Bahama.
You sound like a PLC man.
A relocation payment. A relocation payment of $2,600 for those officers displaced by Hurricane Dorian. A hardship allowance to those who are eligible, which will be determined by the permanent secretaries on a case-by-case basis. Rental assistance to those individuals selected again by the permanent secretaries after consultation with the Ministry of Public Service and the Ministry of Finance. As previously stated, Mr. Speaker, we wanted to do as much as we could, as quickly as we could, under the current provisions and the rules within the public service. Mr. Speaker, I've been taking these proactive steps. Mr. Speaker, I've been taking these proactive steps. I was shocked. I was perhaps horrified, Mr. Speaker, when the spokesperson for the PLP, the Honorable Fred Mitchell, Senator Fred Mitchell, sought to get brownie points by suggesting in the press that the FNM did not do anything or did very little to assist public officers because, as he stated, the FNM did not offer public officers a loan, which was a position taken by the PLP during Hurricane Matthew. This cheap political shot was but one example of the lack of sensitivity and the callous disregard that the PLP had for the Bahamian people. I just wanted to remind Senator Mitchell that it's not about him or the PLP. It is about the Bahamian people and their resolve to build bigger and better. Because we are Bahamians. We are Bahamian strong. And this we regard as a time for national solidarity, not cheap political shots at the expense of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, this sad tragedy of Dorian will be regarded by the Ministry of Public Service and certainly by the Bahamian people as a teachable moment, and will allow us to make the necessary changes in our country. I applaud, therefore, the vision and leadership of our most honorable Prime Minister in the wake of this disaster, and his willingness to support those who have been affected by the storm. Moving forward, we know that several policy initiatives and several policy changes have to be considered. Policies regarding compassionate leave, hardship allowance, relocation of public officers, and financial considerations must be reviewed and amended on a continuous basis. There must be flexibility in the way we respond to national tragedies of this scale to allow for maximum efficiency in the delivery of relief efforts and the maximum sensitivity of our citizens' individual needs. Without getting into too much detail, I can assure this honorable House that efforts are being made in this regard by the Ministry of the Public Service. Our silver lining, though, in the midst of the aftermath of this storm, is the expansion and restructuring of NEMA and the formation of the new ministry to coordinate the reconstruction efforts. Again, I applaud the most honorable Prime Minister for his vision and wish my new cabinet colleague, a member of my fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, and his staff all of the success that he's looking forward to. Mr. Speaker, with all the foreign aid support and expertise coming in from all over the world, we in the Ministry of Public Service wanted to use these set of circumstances as an opportunity to build capacity within the public service. I can report that I believe we have achieved this goal. One of the FNM's administration's most progressive initiatives so far was the recruitment of the college graduates. Within the Ministry of Public Service, young persons at bachelor's and master's degree level expertise in public administration were trained in the ways of the existing public service structure. My team thought it most fitting to use these persons to work with the international agencies since they have exposure to current technology and international policies. We wanted to put our best foot forward to the world, and as they share their knowledge and experience with our international partners, they can return to the public service and empower other Bahamians. This can be a brand new opportunity to bring public service to the 21st century. Mr. Speaker, public service is extraordinarily delighted that these young persons are getting all kinds of positive results and positive comments from members of the general public. And I look forward to them continuing to build capacity within the public service. I turn now to national insurance. In the aftermath of the hurricane, Mr. Speaker, NIB undertook to account for all of its staff, members, and its assets. With respects to the impacted islands, the management clearly understood that the Marsh Harbor building was to become a shelter, and that most, if not all, of our buildings in Grand Bahama would either become shelters or certainly a place for refuge. And so, Mr. Speaker, on the island of Grand Bahama and Abaco, 76 staff members worked in these islands. 17 of the 76 worked in Abaco, and 59 in Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, we are pleased to announce that all staff members are accounted for. In the case of Abaco, the majority of the staff members had to be transported to New Providence because the government complex that housed the National Insurance office was a shelter, and the office of Cooperstown was severely damaged by the hurricane. In Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker, 7 persons were left homeless. They lost everything. 24 persons experienced flooding, and 8 persons reported roof damage to their structures. While the majority of staff members in Grand Bahama remained on the island, 1 or 2 decided to relocate to New Providence, but have since returned to Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, understanding the sensitivity, the need of the staff members in Grand Bahama and in Abaco, the executive management and both unions at NIB sought to offer care packages for the staff. I wish to thank the executives of the Union of Public Officers and the Public Management Union and the leadership of NIB for caring for the staff members in Grand Bahama. NIB has also offered other support measures for its staff generally. We've relaxed the salary advance policy at NIB. We've offered short-term housing support. We provided counseling services to our staff. We've offered rental support for staff who are to be relocated. And we issued some food and clothing vouchers. Mr. Speaker, I then look at customer service. The National Insurance Board, Mr. Speaker, like other government organizations, was called upon to provide assistance to help mitigate challenges that would arise from the severe impact of the Hurricane Dorian. And the following initiatives were put in place by the National Insurance Board. Mr. Speaker, many of the residents from Abaco and Grand Bahama lost everything. This would have included their personal identification card, documents critical in the aftermath of the hurricane as they tried to rebuild their lives. The National Insurance Board Registration Department took the proactive steps to assist with issuing replacement national insurance smart cards to residents of Abaco and Grand Bahama who would have lost their card during Hurricane Dorian. We took the step, Mr. Speaker, to simplify the application. We wanted to cut the red tape so that we could get in the hands of these individuals some form of ID. We also waived the smart card fee for residents of Abaco and Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, replacement cards were issued to Bahamian registrants who are already in receipt of a smart card within 1 day. Meaning, if we had you on our electrical system with your digital photograph and you showed up to NIB, you got your card with the same day. In the case of non-Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, we only reissued cards to those individuals that were compliant with NIB and was on the system with the appropriate documents. To make sure that this work was done quickly, Mr. Speaker, NIB staff were dispatched to all of the shelter areas to collect information on these individuals. And once it was appropriately proven, the smart cards were taken back to the individuals at the location. Mr. Speaker, short-term claims and collaboration with the Ministry of Labor. The National Insurance Board is tasked, Mr. Speaker, with the administration of the country's unemployment assistance program. Mr. Speaker, unemployment assistance is given to individuals, Bahamians, who are out of work, but who are seeking work. They're given this assistance for 13 weeks while they look for work. In the first instance, Mr. Speaker, this benefit was introduced to the Bahamian public by the previous F&M government. Mr. Speaker, the National Insurance Board recognized that given the utter destruction of Dorian, unemployment claims would increase significantly from the hurricane survivors. As such, the Director of NIB immediately initiated an arrangement with the Director of Labor to ensure that there was collaboration and a one-stop shop was set up so that unemployment claims could be handled on a daily basis. So far, Mr. Speaker, I'm informed that just under 1,000 applications have been made to NIB for unemployment assistance. These checks, Mr. Speaker, have been processed and are being processed. The challenge we are having, Mr. Speaker, and I just had a meeting with the director on my break today, the challenge we are having, Mr. Speaker, in the case of Abaco is there's no bank, and government agencies were not functional because persons were dislocated. But we have agreed, Mr. Speaker, that effective next week, cash monies, in many instances, would be available to these individuals in Abaco. An announcement from the NIB board will come forward. Those individuals who have direct deposits, we will continue to deposit their benefit or their claims and benefits onto their accounts. But you know, in the Bahamian context, a lot of us don't like to send our money to the bank. We like cashing on for obvious reasons. And so, Mr. Speaker, while we look at and try to improve the circumstances of individuals in Abaco and in Grand Bahama, hundreds of ordinary Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, are unemployed. We also know, Mr. Speaker, that today we have not gotten all of the persons who are unemployed because there are some generous companies that continue to pay their staff members, notwithstanding the hurricane is going on. So we look forward, and we know that the numbers will increase. And so, Mr. Speaker, to facilitate what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, we also fully know that pensions and other benefits in this time of distress for individuals is crucial. And so, National Insurance advanced $21 million into the accounts of retired individuals in the month of September. We did that early, Mr. Speaker. We did it 1 week before the normal week, and we anticipate, Mr. Speaker, that we will get those checks done this week so that persons affected by the storm can have some form of check, some form of cash, some monies available for them as they seek to rebuild. That is why National Insurance has continued to be proactive, Mr. Speaker. Continue to make sure that what we do is assist the poor, the dispossessed, the unemployed. Mr. Speaker, we have to also assist the Registrar General in their quest to offer ID to individuals in national. 1 minute? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, in working with the Registrar General, we assisted the Registrar General and the Department of Education because we were one of the few agencies that had digital photographs of individuals. And so if an individual showed up to the Registrar General's office and did not have an ID and said, well, all of my documents are lost, we had our IT persons at the office, matched them up with the photograph, and then we reissued. And so, Mr. Speaker, the good thing about National Insurance, I'm told in both Grand Bahama and in Abaco, I'm told that the buildings that survived the best were the NIB buildings. I'm told that they stood the test of time, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to commend the builders of the buildings at NIB. Fletcher McIntosh in the case of Abaco, who did a good job to make sure, Mr. Speaker, things went well for the persons of Abaco. Amidst all this, Mr. Speaker, one of our staff members passed immediately after the storm. It's Annalise Miller, Mr. Speaker, a former clerical coordinator in the Accounts Department in Grand Bahama. She came to work every day, showed up to assist individuals, Mr. Speaker. And after serving for 30 years in NIB, she suddenly passed. We took, and I'd like to take this moment to pause, say not only thank you, but may her soul rest in peace, Mr. Speaker, because she did her job. Her work is now done, and we in NIB will certainly miss her service. Mr. Speaker, I began by saying the Ministry of Public Service and National Insurance is working as best we can to help those who we can as best we can. And we will continue to sympathize with those who have suffered so much. I hope for the future of the people of Abaco and Grand Bahama and of this nation. My hope is that they will rebuild, they will be rebuilt stronger, and we will do better. I'm encouraged every day, Mr. Speaker, by what I have seen and by the resolve of our people. And I'm certain that with God's great help and with all the things in store for us, we will do better. And I wish to end with the words of this year's Independence motto, which is plastered just outside of this parliamentary building. United we stand, together we can. God bless the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, God. There's many. Chair recognizes the member for North and Lutheran.
Mr. Speaker, members of this honorable House, today I take the opportunity to make this contribution on behalf of the people of North Eleuthera. Let me start by acknowledging Let me start by acknowledging the people of North Eleuthera who have sent me to this house to represent them and to address their needs and their concerns. The significance of this bill must in no way be underestimated. We live in an area known as Hurricane Alley, which means that at any time during the hurricane season, we can be hit in any place of our beloved Bahama land. That monstrous hurricane known as Dorian has now caused us to take the necessary steps to put in place stronger measures to protect our people from such future hurricanes that are more than likely to hit this region. North Eleuthera stands to support this bill and to also address the issues leading up to Dorian's pronouncement, its arrival, its departure, and most importantly, to address the way forward. Where do we go from here? How do we eradicate or at least minimize the loss of life and property from this type of natural phenomenon? Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to address some of the challenges and the issues of this type of disaster, and for that, the people of North Eleuthera and the entire Bahamas, for that matter, are animated for this debate. Before I go any further, let me express my sincerest condolences to the families of Abaco and Grand Bahama who lost loved ones to this storm. I too have experienced loss of life as a result of this hurricane. I have a brother-in-law Clarence Jones, who is noted amongst the missing out of High Rock or East End, Grand Bahama. So I know the pain and the anguish that so many families feel and have experienced as a result of this hurricane. And while I can only imagine your pain, know that our prayers, our love, and our support are with you. I notice with extreme interest the passion and anguish that was expressed by some of those members most affected, particularly that of Central and South Abaco, Mr. James Albury, as he spoke on how the effects of this hurricane has had on him and his constituents. It was also reflected by West Grand Bahama and Bimini. How this has changed their life and the manner in which these hurricanes are looked upon. It's not an easy experience to go through. You know, there's an old saying that he who feels it knows it. And it's difficult for you to understand this if you have not experienced it. You know, we can say, I'm sorry. We can say, I know how you feel, but you really don't know. I recall at the first parliamentary caucus after the hurricane, and I looked at my colleague from North Abaco, and in our discussions, he expressed how a trained military man, found or felt helpless to assist his people. And you hear some of the nonsense that people run on about going out in the midst of a storm to do certain things. It just does not add up to reality. This is not about grandstanding. This is not about being heroic. This is about sensibility. And so I also want to express my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the first respondents, particularly those in North Eleuthera, and their efforts. And I have to mention specially Mr. Stephen Cartwright, who led the operation in conjunction with Head Knowles in North Eleuthera. This was an exercise where go-fast boats were dispatched from Harbor Island immediately after the hurricane to go into Abaco and to evacuate survivors from Abaco and bring them into North Eleuthera because planes couldn't fly in. And they were brought into North Eleuthera. And I am going to list some of the boats, and I don't know all, but I was a part of it, and I was proud to be a part of lending a helping hand to be able to bring some of those people who were traumatized. If you could only see the look in their faces and the gratitude that they expressed when they were brought into North Eleuthera. Some of those boat owners, Alex Alexio, Paul King, Adrian Fox, Doug Laurie, Daddy D, Sawyer, and my colleague from St. Anne's say one of his son's boat was also a part of the armada that went into Abaco to rescue persons from that hurricane. And what would happen is we'd bring them in to Three Island Dock, and a triage was set up. All of the information was taken. Doctors were there to examine them. Information was collected, photos were taken. And this exercise, I am so proud to have been a part of it. And after that was done, they were then taken to North Eleuthera Airport. Not specifically the airport, but the building directly across. A building owned by Mr. Greg Stewart. And while there, they were fed. Clothing was set up so that they could select from the clothing, and just about all of them came with only the clothes on their backs. This is not a time for politics when you're dealing with the lives of fellow Bahamians. This is not a time, like James said, to score brownie points, because it's not about the red, the yellow, and the green. It's about being our brother's keeper. It's about reaching out, touching, and helping. I also want to acknowledge the fishermen of Spanish Wells, who I often, in this place, echoed their cry.
Sure.
And before now, I was of the view that we haven't been doing enough to protect them, and to protect their industry, and to assist them, because they have been victims of hurricanes. They have lost traps, boats, fishing gear. And from this very place, I've asked my government to look at the possibility of establishing a fund that they can draw down from to benefit the industry that they love and that is beneficial to this country. But they took their vessels too into Abaco. And they took fuel, they took food, they took supplies, and they brought evacuees out by the hundreds. We were one of North Duluth, or our residents in North Duluth was there, face to the scene, because we know about the destruction of hurricanes. We know too well. We had experienced Hurricane Andrew in '92, and so it was personal for us, and easy to become a part of. At us locations, persons were able to come, be examined by physicians. They were able to get clothing. They were able to get food. They were able to get all types of assistance, because we know what they went through. This was the least that we could do. And so I want to thank all of those strategic partners. You know, we know there's been plenty help, we know there's been plenty assistance, but I want to recognize them for the role they played. I want to recognize Mr. Sean Ingram and the One Eleuthera Foundation. I want to recognize the Methodist Habitat that opened its doors and made available its facilities for the evacuees. I want to recognize White Crown Aviation that allowed airplanes to fly into North Duluth with tons and tons of supplies, when it was too congested to fly into Nassau, because you were waiting about an hour and a half to 2 hours on the runway just to get away. But this we took upon ourselves because we felt the pain of our friends, our neighbors, our fellow countrymen of the Abacos and Grand Bahama. I want to recognize Mr. Patrick Kemp, the airport manager at North Duluth. I want to recognize the customs officers at North Duluth who helped expedite, like I said, plane after plane, helicopter after helicopter, DC-3s, all to help and aid our brothers and sisters. I want to recognize Mr. Quincy Kemp of the Bahamas Daybreak, that when we would bring in hundreds of persons and had to get them into Nassau, he made his vessel available, that we were able to bring evacuees into Nassau by the hundreds. But it's about being our brother's keeper. That's what it's about. You know, I think of the young man who was rescuing persons in Grand Bahama, and he was on his jet ski. And I know you've seen it because they must have played it a million times. But we cannot thank the resilience of are fellow Bahamians who think like that. When asked, why do you do it? This is who we are. This is what we do. I am a Bahamian. It speaks for itself. That is the spirit that has come as a result of this devastating hurricane known as Dorian. I also want to acknowledge Workers' House and Governor's Harbor, which is still being used as a shelter and providing supplies for those persons out of Abaco who have been, and I don't like the word misplaced or even displaced. I prefer us to use the word who's our temporary guests. And we have to treat them as such. And we are not doing even enough. Because what I found out to be the case, that while some of these individuals have relocated to Eleuthera, some of the supplies are not reaching them or not getting to them. And it's creating a hardship on the family members. Because most of the supplies are going to the shelters. And I know of a family in Harbor Island who's got about 8, 9 persons. I know of numerous persons that are in North Eleuthera. In Spanish Wells, we have a couple hundred persons actually living in Spanish Wells. Our schools have been overcrowded as a result, but we welcome them. There's been such an influx of individuals into North Eleuthera that we have a shortage of teachers. The ministry has indicated there are teachers available, but we don't even have apartments for them to rent because there's a shortage of apartments. Not only for teachers, we have the same dilemma with nurses. But we will work through it because they are our brothers and sisters. The way forward is crucial, and we must partner with others and keep an open mind to suggestions, ideas, and commentary from others as climate change is now a reality. We must continue to work with organizations and groups that could provide helpful and meaningful suggestions and how we combat this. I was fortunate a couple weeks ago to be invited by the Prime Minister to attend the 74th Annual General Assembly in New York. And one of the main subjects was climate change. And it was being constantly talked about by the various leaders of the world. I had the privilege of being there along with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Darren Henfield, and Minister Wells, Minister of Local Government and Transport. And while there, I had an opportunity to listen to such meaningful discussions about how the world is now being affected by climate change. The reality of it, and how small nation countries like us, who contribute very, very little to it, are the most affected by it. How do we deal with it when it appears not to be in the interests of the major countries that are, in my opinion, the culprits? We don't produce the heavy, harmful gases like some of the larger nations, but their contribution to it puts us at the most vulnerable in regard to this. Our CARICOM countries, I was impressed by the manner in which they put forth their argument and saying, listen, there must be a better way in us dealing with this going forward. We are affected the most by this, but yet our voices are not being heard. Debates on climate change should be engaged frequently and every time and everywhere, because it is needed to educate our people on this matter. This is not a figment of one's imagination, nor is it fake news. The number of hurricanes and their intensity over the past several years, as well as the chaotic weather changes, are evident of this reality. But we are resilient people, and we will rebound and rebuild. We will emerge stronger, but we must be always aware of what is happening around us. We must ready ourselves for any disaster as best we can. While we cannot stop these natural disasters, we can train our people and educate them of the do's and don'ts so that they are better able to prepare their escape and survival methods. Abaco, Grand Bahama, we are here for you. I understand the frustration that a lot of your constituents have. But while they're in North Eleuthera, we will do what we can possibly do to make their stay as comfortable as possibly can. Our schools may be crowded, but we will share our space. Our teachers may not be enough to cover all our students, but such as we have, we will give unto you. Going forward, I have a few suggestions, and I'll make it quick. I am of the view that the government should partner with private NGOs or private persons for the purpose of building and maintaining shelters in strategically located places in the Bahamas. Those shelters could be used as multi-purpose facilities. We are not in a position to just build these large buildings and let them stay. I'm aware of that. But these buildings could be used as community centers. They could be used as concert halls. They could be used as voting stations. They could be used as training facilities. They could be used as holding stations. They could be used as technical centers All of these things they can be used for, but more important, they could be used whenever there's a need to evacuate out of the projected paths of hurricanes. I had an opportunity to speak to the leader of Singapore, who suggested that he is not totally, or he's not excited about the level of progress in regard to combating and dealing with climate change. And his advice was, while we are small nations and cannot dictate to the main culprits, what we now have to do, Mr. Speaker, we have to adapt. We have to change the way in which we are looking at things, because the norm cannot protect us from what we are currently being faced with. And so, while it is important that we look at constructing facilities that could resist 200 miles per hour winds, we must look at new ideas, new technologies. And he's indicated that he's prepared to share that information and that technology to small island nations like ours. And so we need to embrace that opportunity. It's there for us, and I hope that we will utilize it. I also believe that we should look at establishing a task force to chart the way forward on how we deal with this. Because what we're dealing with is not the norm. You know, gone are the days when you could have gone into any church as a shelter. So because of what we're now faced with, it is incumbent upon us to have a group to study the best way forward in dealing with these unusual phenomena. So all I say to Abaco, to Grand Bahama, we've been where you are. We didn't have the volume of deaths, but we had the level of destruction. I remember flying over Harbor Island after Andrew in '92. And you could not find a single speck of green. But it served as a pruning process, a weeding out of the dead and giving new birth. And I believe that Abaco and Grand Bahama will rebuild. You can come back bigger. You could come back better. You could come back stronger.
Brother. You're coming back. Brother.
I could take your phrase. But I can say this. We support you. We are there for you. And better days are ahead. North Eleuthera supports this government bill. On one other note, bigger and better. But I just want to say, on another note, I want to extend condolences to the family of Mr. Warren Grant, MCM Warren Grant. I would not be able to sit in my chair if I do not recognize the contribution that he has made to this party, and more so to his community. He will be eulogized on the 25th of this month, Friday the 25th of this month in Harbor Island. And I will expect to see as many of my colleagues there to show the level of support that he has given. Thank you. And Abaco, Grand Bahama, we are with you.
Thank you, North Luther. As many. Chair recognizes the member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what a powerful presentation by the member for North Eleuthera. I shall not be long, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy. But as always, Mr. Deputy, as I stand in this place, I am fond for recognizing the enduring goodness and mercy and grace of Yahweh Elohim. Mr. Deputy, it is these poignant moments in a nation's history. The theologians would call these moments Kairos moments. Because it is at these points in times, Mr. Deputy, that sometimes we question the goodness, grace, and mercy of Yahweh Elohim. But Mr. Speaker, it is precisely these moments that we have to remind ourselves that our God is good all the time. Yes. And all the time, God is good. So we thank him for his enduring goodness towards us here in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I also thank the people of Bamboo Town in whose stead I am allowed to stand in this place, and Lord willing, in 2022 and beyond, Lord willing, I will be standing in this place. No matter what some may say, there's a God who stands above us all. The second wisest man who ever lived, Solomon, said that the heart of the king is in the hand of God, and he turns it which way he wills. And Mr. Deputy, in a democracy, the people are king. So it is God who will turn their hearts in the direction he will have it. So I don't want nobody making no prognostication over me in this place. A word to the wise is sufficient. And who have ears to hear, let them hear. Let them hear.
Thou shalt not be moved.
I shall not be moved.
I mean, you'll be moved, man.
Lord willing, I shall not be moved.
You don't say that too hard to be the heritage.
I's a South Andrews man too. We are both South Andrews men. Hold down. At this time, I say to the people of Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the affected Keys that even amid all the destruction and death, we remain a people of unquenchable hope, united as one to share with those who are left homeless, brokenhearted, and suffering. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, there is a balm in Gilead that heals the wounded soul. Mr. Deputy, I must enter into the record of this House the fact that I have, since the passing of Hurricane Dorian, witnessed the true generosity, tenacity, and resilience of the Bahamian people. We all know that Dorian was a monster storm which has cemented itself as a catastrophic event in the life of the modern Bahamas. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the destruction wrought has left an indelible mark on the psyche of the Bahamian people and visitors alike. This horrific storm will pass into our nation's stories from generation to generation. We have heard from the member of Marco City a rendition of his horrific experience. And Mr. Deputy, his experience is so indicative of scores of our fellow Bahamians and visitors alike on Grand Bahama and Abaco. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, Dorian reported with flood waters in excess of 20 feet from storm surges as a result of a king tide. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't even a spring tide. It was a special kind of spring tide called a king tide. Mr. Deputy, there were also reports of multiple tornadoes that were spawned within the hurricane, torrential rainfall, and unprecedented wind speeds. The meteorologist, Mr. Deputy, would call Dorian a perfect storm. Indeed, Mr. Deputy, Dorian has reduced the Abacos and East Grand Bahama to an almost unrecognizable landscape. Mr. Deputy, the stark images of grief-stricken families with expressions of hopelessness and despair, peoples whose lives and livelihoods have clearly been shattered, decimated homes, business houses, places of worship, and in some instances, entire communities are all etched in our collective memory. For those of you who have weathered this monster hurricane, the government, the private sector, the churches, our neighbors, the international community, all collectively together have risen to the occasion to deliver the healing and hope. And Lord willing, Mr. Deputy, this government will continue to do so. This government's plans for restoration and resilience, Mr. Speaker, will be realized. Mr. Deputy, I take this opportunity again, having spoken to plans for restoration and resilience, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the newest member of the Prime Minister's Cabinet, the Honorable Member for Central Grand Bahama, Mr. Iram Lewis. He's not here, but you know, he's my longtime friend and colleague, even before we came into this place. For well over a decade, Mr. Speaker, he and I traveled the world as professional athletes competing for the Bahamas in the World Championships and Olympic Games. And Mr. Speaker, I want to again congratulate him. The Prime Minister said that he's gone to a meeting in Florida. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, undoubtedly the financial implications that accompany the structural damages from Dorian and the displacements of residents are astronomical. I join the throng of members who have thanked the international community, non-governmental agencies, business establishments, and individuals who have been generous in their donations of their human, material, and monetary resources. Mr. Deputy, I also want to thank, at this point in time, the first responders who were gallant soldiers who went in, Mr. Deputy, and sought to rescue folk. We are most appreciative of their efforts. But also, Mr. Deputy, I want to take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Prime Minister, who, in my estimation, Mr. Deputy, has been doing a yeoman's task. He's been traveling. It seems as if every day, Mr. Deputy, he's either in Grand Bahama or in the Abacos. As a matter of fact, Mr. Deputy, he's scheduled to go to Abaco on Friday to meet with the Chamber of Commerce to invite them and to get their collective views and our plans to move forward as we reconstruct Abaco and as we reconstruct East Grand Bahama. And then he's going to be back in Abaco on Saturday, thanking the police officers and defense force officers and government employees and private sector organizations and NGOs for the work that they have been doing to help us rebuild this beautiful land we call our home. Mr. Deputy, one of the more popular mantras has been Bahamas Strong. And these words have resonated near and far. They have come to symbolize the strength of our people, our resolve, and our determination to rise above our circumstances. Mr. Deputy, today we know that there is hope. That hope is mirrored in the faces of young boys and girls from Abaco and East Grand Bahama who, notwithstanding the perils of Dorian, hold fast to dreams that they still intend to realize. And Mr. Deputy, this government is determined to ensure that their dreams become a reality. Mr. Deputy, I will not get into the clauses and subclauses and subsections of the bill that's before us. I believe that the member for Yamakwa, the Minister of Financial Services and Immigration, most ably laid out the government's position, and thus he laid out my position as well. So I'm not going to delve into the bill, but instead, Mr. Deputy, I am going to deal with matters in the ministry for which the Prime Minister has given me a remit. Mr. Deputy, prior to the passage of Hurricane Dorian, my ministry sought and continues to address several matters of critical importance to the nation, and we were seeking to do so by year's end. They included, but are not limited to, meeting standards related to the compliance for the International Ship and Port Facility Code, the ISPS, and the establishment of a national and international ship and port facility security compliance unit. There was the bus unification project, and we sought to populate all local government districts with administrators prior to the local government elections of June next year. Mr. Deputy, I wish to draw the honorable member's attention to the fact that despite having the career path approved for Family Island administrators, we are now faced with a situation where alternative accommodations in the affected areas had to be arranged, and relocation of several administrators had to be immediately facilitated. Mr. Deputy, we have remained focused, however, on having all 32 districts populated according to national demographics by year end, despite having experienced Doreen. Mr. Deputy, in regards to the bus unification project, which was scheduled to have been commenced in September, we are going to have a new announcement date for it. The media has been asking all day, it seems, for a date, but I want them to know that this coming Monday, we will be giving them a new date as the commencement for the bus unification pilot project. Mr. Deputy, I also wish to now praise the House of the activities carried out before, during, and in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian by officers within my ministry. First, I began by commending the diligent and professional efforts of the ministry staff, who I can safely say made extraordinary efforts to bring some semblance of normalcy to the operations of their respective departments in the Abacos and Grand Bahama. Local government. Mr. Speaker, you are aware that the local government administrators are the disaster management coordinators for the Family Islands. Accordingly, each did what was necessary to shore up their islands, securing lives and property well ahead of the storm. Here is an appropriate time to thank each of the administrators in the jurisdictions of the affected islands. Each performed to the best of their abilities, even with the burdensome knowledge that their families and homes were in peril's way. In the immediate aftermath, they were the points of contact to coordinate search, rescue, shelter, and eventual evacuation efforts. The Department of Local Government was also first in to assess the status of staff on the islands and quickly identified relief workers in the local government department. Once the evacuation of residents began, the Department of Local Government repopulated its list of staff members on the islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama with relief workers. This list reflected 17 volunteers from Andros, Eleuthera, Exuma, and New Providence who provided support for the Family Island administrators. Ms. Kefi-Ann Ferguson, Executive Officer stationed at South Andros office, immediately moved to Abaco, tasked with securing accommodations and transportation that would permit other persons to render assistance. It is noteworthy that within her first 2 days on the island of Abaco, she established the first official distribution center at the Central Abaco Primary School CAPS, which currently serves as the main distribution point for Central Abaco. She deserves our appreciation. Mr. Speaker, the 17 officers mentioned are currently assisting with disaster relief and distribution efforts and assisting with efforts to restore operation at the administrator's office on the impacted islands. In order to achieve their goals, these officers, Mr. Deputy, are working 14-hour days, including weekends. And Mr. Deputy, for that, again, I want to commend them. And indeed, they are deserving of commendation. Mr. Deputy, it is estimated that the Department of Local Government will incur expenses in the area of some $40,000 by the 31st of October 2019 for providing relief assistance on the island of Abaco in particular. In North Abaco, workers who remain on the island reported to the main distribution and relief center to assist Family Island Administrator Mrs. Terrence Boodle Lang, and a number of displaced Ministry of Education teachers are also assisting the Family Island Administrator, Ms. Lang. Mr. Deputy, on Grand Bahama, the operations of the Administrator's Office in 8 Mile Rock and the city of Freeport were operating on a half-day basis as a result of the storm. The office, Mr. Deputy, in East Grand Bahama was completely destroyed. Therefore, all of the local government business now emanates from the office in Freeport. Additionally, members should note that the monthly funds paid to the local government districts are being identified for access to assist in the affected areas. Budgetary amounts accrued to just over $1.2 million for banking and $212,000 for cash distribution for the local government district consuls for the period July through September. And we're going to use those funds, Mr. Deputy, to assist in East Grand Bahama and Abaco. Mr. Deputy, in regards to the mailboat earlier, I referred to evacuations from the affected areas. The movement of people was a great priority, and I'm happy that my ministry, assisted by the member for Saudi Lutra, Mr. Stephen Hank Johnson, who is not here, he played a large role and a very critical role in helping us transport over 1,000 evacuees to New Providence via the motor vessels Captain Emmett and Legacy on the 7th, 8th, and 9th of September. Mr. Deputy, I want the Bahamian people to know that the ministry remains poised to return large numbers of residents, those evacuees, back to Abaco and Grand Bahama at the government's request once we would have made the necessary arrangements in Abaco. It should be noted, however, that the regular mailboat service has been restored to Grand Bahama, Sandy Point, Marsh Harbor, and very soon, by this weekend, in actual fact, Mr. Deputy, to the new port in North Abaco. Mr. Deputy, members should also note that the Port Department was embedded in NEMA's Emergency Operations Center during Hurricane Dorian's passage and in its aftermath. Before motor vessels transport could be made available, our port controller, Commander Raymond King, who has since been redeployed, being keenly aware of port's importance to the reestablishment of commerce with his Caribbean counterparts, made aerial surveillance on Wednesday, the 4th of September, of the affected areas. And Mr. Deputy, within an hour, he was able to map the way ahead and gave pertinent recommendations to clear waterways of all navigational hazards, which my ministry immediately undertook to have done. At Marsh Harbor, while access to his dock, now, Mr. Deputy, there are no more impediments. The Marsh Harbor dock and port is open. And Mr. Deputy, we are in the process now of looking as to how we can make it ISPS compliant. The United States has given us a reprieve in that regard, understanding the situation of Dorian. But as of today, container shipments have gone into Marsh Harbor. Mr. Deputy, the decision has been taken to operationalize the North Abaco container port at Cooperstown, which was essentially spared the effects of Hurricane Dorian. An assessment was done to determine the furnishings, and the ISPS requirements. And those infrastructural requirements, Mr. Deputy, are now being addressed. And as I said, we are looking at week's end to be able to have the North Abaco port completely operational. My ministry is now working in tandem also, Mr. Deputy, with the Ministry of Public Works to address some necessary dredging for the North Abaco port, because we're looking at facilitating larger cargo vessels and giving them access to the country's newest port of entry. Mr. Deputy, again, the Marsh Harbor Port facility will require reconstruction. And as I speak, Mr. Deputy, we are deploying an additional 3 officers to both Marsh Harbor and Cooperstown. The cost of this redeployment, Mr. Deputy, will be some $60,000 over the next 9 months. Mr. Deputy, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Transport and Local Government happens to be, also is, the chair of the National Oil Spill Contingency Advisory Committee. It is called NOSAC. and it sits in the Ministry of Transport. Members are aware of the spill recorded at East Grand Bahama in the area of Equinor South Riding Point Storage and Transshipment Terminal. Key committee members of NORSAC have made 2 official site visits to date to carry out sustained monitoring and evaluation requirements. However, it should be noted also, and was spoken to by the Minister of the Environment, that consistent monitoring efforts are ongoing at the site by government officers in Grand Bahama. Mr. Deputy, I move to the Department of Meteorology. You know, the Speaker would be well aware of the department. And Mr. Deputy, the Department of Meteorology truly deserves our applause for their accurate predictions concerning the monster called Doreen. We never really appreciate their worth until times such as these, Mr. Deputy. So we thank Director Baisden and his entire team of experts. The Met Department is pleased to report that as a result of Doreen, they only lost 1 Doppler radar, and that Doppler radar, Mr. Deputy, will be repaired by Vaisala, the maker, and that is expected to arrive within the next 4 weeks into the Bahamas, and the installation of that Doppler radar will be completed 2 weeks thereafter. Other instruments required will be completed by mid-November. It should also be noted by the 11th of September 2019 that the department immediately after Doreen had installed a Davis instrument at the Leonard M. Thompson International Airport to assist air traffic controllers with providing meteorological information for aviation. And on the 19th of September 2019, a team from the department traveled to Grand Bahama for the installation of a Davis instrument at Freeport International Airport to assist with aviation. Mr. Deputy, in conclusion, I once again commend the efforts of the Ministry of Transport and local government staff, and in particular my new permanent secretary, Ms. Antoinette Thompson, Mr. Deputy, who's been doing a yeoman's task during and after this disaster. It is their positive mindset and effort that bears witness to my belief that we will rebound, we will rebuild, and we will revitalize the hopes and aspirations of Bahamians for the resilience, renewal, and renaissance of our Bahama land. Mr. Deputy, the good book admonishes us to be our brother's keeper. In so doing so, we have a duty, a debt of duty to safeguard the safety and well-being of our brothers and sisters. I'm getting strong tonight. But I will say this. I will say this, South Advis, that Bamboo Town supports this disaster preparedness and response amendment bill, and to God be the glory for great things he has done and will continue to do for and on behalf of the Bahamian people.
As many.
No, we're going to speak early in the morning. I will be all day tomorrow.
As many. The chair recognizes the member for Kalani. As many. The chair recognizes the member for Bamboo Town.
Anyone to hold it quiet.
Mr. Deputy, I do move now that the House suspends until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, Thursday, the 17th of September.
It's been moved and seconded that the House do suspend until 10 a.m. tomorrow, Thursday, the 17th of October, 2019. As many members are in favor of being seated, those opposing will rise.
Mr. Deputy, I do not move that the House suspends.
It's been moved and seconded that the House herein be suspended until tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., the 17th of October, 2019. As many members are in favor of remain seated, those opposing will rise. The House is hereby suspended till 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, the 17th of October 2019.